I woke up gasping. Something was burning nearby. I sat up fast and looked around. I wasn't in my apartment. I was lying on a straw mat inside a broken-down shack with a rotting thatched roof. A skinny woman was kneeling beside me, burning paper money and crying quietly. The moment she saw me sit up, she screamed, "A ghost! He's risen from the dead," and bolted out the door. My head started pounding like crazy, and I blacked out again. When I came back around, a flood of memories that weren't mine filled my head. I started piecing together what happened. Back in my real life, I was a food delivery guy. One ordinary day, I was standing outside a mall waiting for a customer to pick up her order of stinky noodles. Then out of nowhere, a heartbroken woman weighing over 200 pounds fell from above and crushed me. Everything went black, and I woke up here, in some feudal dynasty called the Great Xia. The body I was now in also belonged to a guy named Chu Chun, 21 years old, son of the village's only schoolteacher. His mother died long ago. His father, a scholar, passed away just 6 months back. That left him alone with his wife. The father had actually built up a decent life for them. But after he died, this idiot Chu Chun got addicted to gambling and threw it all away in under half a year. Land, house, everything gone. Now they were stuck in this crumbling wreck. The woman who ran out screaming was his wife, Li Qinglian, 19 years old. Her family had been wiped out by famine and war, so his father had bought her for 2 silver coins a year ago. She was hardworking, gentle, and obedient. She thought she was marrying into a good home. Instead, she got this mess. Yesterday, Chu Chun had taken the few copper coins she earned doing chores for the village chief and lost it all at the gambling house. Then he went and picked a fight with the gamblers who cheated him and got beaten half to death. To make it worse, he now owed the gambling house 5 silver taels. They said if he didn't pay in 5 days, they'd drag Li Qinglian off to a brothel to settle the debt. Then he died, and I took over his body. And that's not even the worst of it. This guy used to beat his wife. Regularly. In front of his friends. He once said he'd hit her to liven up the mood. An absolute piece of garbage. A big man came in, my second uncle in this body, a sturdy farmer. He'd thought I was dead and had gone to order a coffin. When he saw me sitting up alive, he rushed over and checked my face and forehead with his rough, calloused hands. "You're alive. You scared us half to death. Just live right from now on, okay? Take care of Qinglian. I'll figure out the money for the gambling debt. She won't be taken away." I nodded and said nothing. He rushed back out to stop the coffin from being made. Li Qinglian crept back in, looking terrified. "Husband, are you all right? Does anything hurt?" A whole year of beatings had made her afraid of me. When I stepped off the bed, she flinched backwards without even thinking. I reached out and pulled back her sleeve. Underneath that patched-up rough cloth were bruises covering her pale skin, dark and ugly. My chest tightened. That was done by the guy whose body I'm in now. What a bastard. She panicked and started apologizing before I even said a word. I told her I was just hungry and asked her to make something to eat. She came back with a bowl of black mush, wild leaves boiled in water with a few sad grains of millet floating around. I took one sip and spat it out. It tasted like nothing except bitterness. "You call this porridge?" I asked. She burst into tears immediately. "I'm sorry. I know you don't like wild greens. I'll go do more work for the village chief and earn money to buy proper millet. Please don't hit me." I felt sick. Not at her, at myself. Well, at the old me. At him. Looking at her properly for the first time, she was actually beautiful. Clear eyes, high nose, delicate features. Just thin from not eating enough. Her figure still obvious even under layers of patched rags. I told her the greens were just too bitter and that I'd figure something out. I walked into the kitchen. A few clay pots, a cold stove, and her own meal sitting there, plain boiled leaves and water. I checked the rice jar. Empty. Not even a grain. I wanted to cook something real for us, but there was nothing to work with. I walked back outside, thinking hard. I had to find a way out of this mess, and fast. I stepped outside and got my first real look at what passed for our home. 2 mud brick shacks with thatched roofs, 1 bedroom, 1 kitchen, a wooden board for a bed, a thin blanket, a grass mat, and a few bricks stacked up as a table. That was everything we owned. So this is what it means to have nothing, I muttered to myself. Just then Li Qinglian came out with a basket on her arm. "Rest at home, husband. I'm going to do work for the village chief." Even after everything the old Chu Chun put her through, she was still out there earning money to feed him. What a good woman. What a waste on that guy. I watched her walk away, then went back inside and lay down on the mat. My whole body ached from the beating the gambling house gave this body. It was real, every bruise, every cut. I was exhausted. Before I knew it, I fell asleep. Then something strange happened. In my dream, I was back in the shopping mall from my old world. The lights were on, the shelves were full, everything looked exactly the same. Except there wasn't a single person anywhere. No customers, no staff, nobody. Even outside, the streets and parked cars were completely empty for about 2 kilometers in every direction. Beyond that, just gray fog. I stood there putting it together. I brought this place with me when I crossed over. An entire shopping mall, and the buildings around it, had come through with me into this ancient world. I ran into a clothing store and looked in the mirror. Staring back at me was a tall young man, about 6 feet, covered in wounds, dressed in ancient robes. Way better looking than my old face, I'll be honest. Then a thought popped into my head. How do I get back? The moment I thought it, I opened my eyes and was staring at the thatched roof of our shack again. Interesting, I said. It works with just a thought. I tried again, thought myself back into the mall. It worked instantly. The place was all still there, untouched. I grabbed a pack of cigarettes and a lighter from the convenience store near the entrance, thought myself home, and lit one up. My hands were shaking a little, not from fear, from excitement. I had crossed into ancient times with a massive shopping mall in my pocket. I went back and forth so many times I lost count. Each trip I carried out bags of rice, a big slab of pork, fresh vegetables, an iron pot, spices, condiments. I ripped off all the packaging so nothing would look suspicious and poured everything into clay jars. I also raided the pharmacy next to the mall, cleaned and bandaged all my wounds, swallowed a few antibiotic pills. Looking at the cuts on my body, some of them were knife wounds, not just fists. My mood went dark. Once I heal up, I'm coming for that gambling house, I said quietly, or this whole trip means nothing. I sat on the bed and waited for Li Qinglian to come home. By the time night fell, she pushed open our creaking door, exhausted. She glanced at me, sighed, and headed for the kitchen. Then I heard her scream. She came running back into the room, eyes wide. There's a ghost in the kitchen. The rice jar is full. There's meat. She stumbled toward me without thinking. I caught her by the waist and held on. It's fine. I brought all of that. She pulled back, confused. You brought it? Where did you get money? And that's white rice. That's expensive. That's way too much for. Then she noticed I had my arm around her and tried to break free. I held on and smiled. You're my wife. Why would I let go? She stared at me like I was a completely different person. Which, fair enough, I was. The old Chu Chen never once called her by a kind name. He never touched her either. The village had rumors that he couldn't. So now she had no idea what to make of me. I let her go and told her to cook, and that the food was a gift from an immortal friend of mine. She burst into tears. She had decided in her head that I must have sold her to someone and made up a story about an immortal friend to cover it, that the food was bought with the money from selling her. I know, she said, crying quietly. You always said I was too thin and weak. It's okay. At least you'll eat well for a few days. I stood there feeling awful. That's what this man had done to her. Made her think the worst of herself as a complete reflex. I pulled her close and held her. Qinglian, I was terrible to you, and I'm sorry. That beating knocked something loose in me. I'm not that person anymore. I promise. I will give you the best life I can. And when I was gone, right before I came back, I dreamed of an old man with a white beard. He taught me things. Everything is going to be different now. She stayed still against my shoulder for a long moment, not saying anything. I could feel her thinking, wondering if it was real, wondering if she could believe it. Maybe she was starting to think that I actually had changed. After calming Qinglian down, I lay back on the bed. My body was worn out. All that running back and forth to the mall had pushed it past its limit. I needed to rest and let my wounds heal. But my mind was already planning. In a day or two, I'd head to the city and sell something. Glass cups. This world definitely didn't have those yet. I reached into my space and pulled one out, then slid it under the bed to hide it. I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let anyone find out about my space. Not yet. Not until I had money, status, and enough power to protect myself. So I needed a believable way to explain where things came from. That meant earning real money first, building a cover. About half an hour later, the smell of meat drifted in from the kitchen. My stomach growled loud. This body had been starving for a long time. Qinglian came in carrying a clay pot. I looked inside. 2 or 3 thin slices of pork floating in a full pot of broth, a few vegetable leaves, and 2 small bowls of rice porridge on the side. I understood. In this world, meat was something only wealthy families and landowners ate. For common village people, even plain rice was a luxury. I didn't complain. I picked up the bowl and ate fast. Then I looked over at Qinglian. She was sitting quietly, sipping from her bowl. I grabbed it to check. Nothing but rice water. Not a single grain of actual rice. My chest hurt. I got up, went to the kitchen, cut about a pound of pork, stir-fried it in the iron pot, then cooked a full pound of rice in the clay pot. When I walked back out with a full plate of meat and a big bowl of rice and set it in front of her, she just stared. From now on, I told her, you eat like this every meal. If you're still this thin in a month, I'll sell you. I was joking, mostly. In this era, men wanted wives who were strong and healthy enough to work and have children. Qinglian was thin and small, which was why his father had only paid 2 silver coins for her. I wanted her to eat properly and get healthy. She looked stunned, but she ate. All of it. The whole bowl of rice and the whole plate of meat. I think it was probably the best meal she'd had in her entire life. That night we lay down together with our clothes on. She curled up on her side of the mat, facing away. I fell asleep quickly, my body still healing, my mind finally quiet. Sometime in the middle of the night, a cold wind woke me up. Winter was coming, and the shack had gaps everywhere. I got up, pulled the patched blanket over Qinglian's shoulders, and went to the kitchen to start a fire. I almost reached into my space to grab a proper blanket. I stopped myself. Sitting by the fire, I made up my mind. Tomorrow I was going to the city. Morning came with roosters crowing and dogs barking from the village entrance. Qinglian woke up and panicked when she didn't see me next to her. In this era, a wife sleeping later than her husband was considered shameful. I was already in the kitchen. I handed her a bowl of egg noodles. She apologized for waking up late. I told her it didn't matter. She could sleep more if she wanted. She didn't know what to do with that. After we ate, I told her I was heading to the city and she should stay home. She immediately asked if I was going back to the gambling house. Why would I go there? I said. My wounds aren't even healed. I'd lose the fight. She thought about that, then asked what I was going there for. I told her the old man from my dream had taught me things, and I thought I could make some money. She tried to stop me, said I should rest, that I wasn't well enough. I talked her around eventually. I tucked the glass cup under my arm and headed out. The village belonged to Qingyou town, which belonged to Qingyun city. I planned to skip the town entirely and go straight to the city. A glass cup in a small town might earn a few coins. In the city, it could be worth serious money. At the village entrance, I ran into my second uncle, who came rushing over the moment he saw me. Nephew, your wounds aren't healed and you're already heading to the gambling house. I told him I was going to the city, not the gambling house. He didn't believe me. I could see him thinking. Was I going to sell Qinglian to pay the debt? He decided to come along to keep an eye on me, pretending he had his own business in the city. Honestly, that was perfect. I had no idea where anything was. Come then, I said. I'll buy you a drink when we get there. Then an annoying voice cut in from behind. My, Chuchin buying drinks? Must be a special day. Don't forget your brother. It was Ma-san. Village layabout, 3rd generation. The kind of man who stole chickens, pestered widows, and had never done an honest day's work in his life. He was also the one who first dragged the original Chu Chun into that gambling house. My fist tightened on its own. Then I looked at my still healing body and let it go. Oh, it's third brother, I said, keeping my voice even. No sneaking around the village chief's wife today? He must be home. Ma-san shut up fast after my comment and stomped off threatening to call the gambling house. My second uncle grabbed my arm and pulled me down the road before anything else could happen. Why do you even talk to people like that? He's already caused you enough trouble. My uncle's name was Chu Dazhuang. He'd been a soldier when he was young, got his leg cut up in battle, and was sent home to the village. Since then he'd just farmed quietly and lived simply. A good, honest man. The two of us made quite a pair walking to Qingyun City, a limping veteran and a guy who had literally just come back from the dead. 20-something li of road. It took us 3 full hours. By the time the city gates came into view, I was completely done. I sat down on the ground the moment we arrived. My uncle pulled me back up. You need to get stronger. That was nothing. Then I noticed there was a long line at the gate. I asked my uncle what everyone was waiting for. He didn't know either. The person in front of us turned around, a woman who looked us up and down and said, "You're not from around here, are you? There's an entry fee. An entry fee just to walk into the city." Unbelievable. I asked how much. She held up 2 fingers. 2 coins per person. My uncle immediately yanked me out of the line without a word. "What are you doing?" We were almost at the front. "Do you have money?" he asked. "No, don't you? Your aunt keeps all of it." So we'd walked for 3 hours and couldn't even get through the gate because neither of us had brought a single coin. My uncle suggested we just go home. I dodged out of his reach. There was no way I was walking all the way back empty-handed. I told him I needed to use the outhouse and headed toward the trees nearby. "Lazy people always need to go at the worst times," he grumbled, sitting down on the ground. Once I was out of sight, I slipped into my space. I thought for a moment about what to bring out, then filled a small sack with about 3 pounds of white rice and walked back out. I sat down next to my uncle and then shouted at the crowd by the gate, "Come look." My uncle brought rice to pay for a bride, and she ran off on him. Selling cheap. Get it while it lasts. My uncle nearly jumped out of his skin. "What are you saying about your aunt? And where did you steal that rice from?" A few people gathered around almost immediately, picking up the rice and looking it over. "How much for it, young man?" I panicked internally. I had no idea what rice cost here. I quietly asked my uncle. He shrugged. "Never bought any." "Who can afford it?" A man in his 30s stepped forward, eyes a little too sharp. "Good quality rice. Market price is 5 coins a shung. You've got about 2 shung there. I'll give you 12 coins for all of it." I looked at him. 5 coins a shung was definitely not the real price. He was lowballing me hard. But I didn't care. I just needed 4 coins to get through that gate. "Deal," I said loudly. My uncle flinched like I'd slapped him. The man handed over 12 coins, grabbed the sack, and disappeared into the crowd. The people around us shook their heads and muttered to each other. Apparently quality rice like that sold for 20 coins a shung. I'd practically given it away. What a country bumpkin. Poor kid had no idea what he had. I ignored all of it, grabbed my uncle's arm, and pulled him toward the gate. "Let's go." "We're going in." My uncle looked at me like I'd just set money on fire, which, honestly, I had. Old habits from the original Chu Chun dying hard, he probably thought. We waited in line for another half hour, paid 4 coins, and walked through. The guards at the gate looked at us like we were idiots. I didn't care. Inside the city, it was a completely different world. Busy streets, stone-paved roads, people in fine silk clothes walking everywhere. Food stalls lined the streets. Clothing shops hung their wares outside. The smell of roasting meat drifted out of a restaurant nearby, and my uncle actually swallowed hard looking at it. "Uncle," I said confidently, "we're eating there later." He looked at our ragged clothes, then at the 8 coins I had left in my hand, and said nothing. He clearly thought I'd lost my mind. We stopped in front of a shop with a large character painted above the door. "A pawn shop." "What are you doing here?" my uncle asked. "Wait outside. I'll be right back." I walked in. The shop clerk took one look at my torn clothes and waved me toward the door. "Go beg somewhere else. You're bad for business." I stopped and looked at him. "You sure you want to throw me out? You're not worried your boss will fire you for it?" He stared at me, thrown off by the strange way I said it, but curious now. "Well then," he said, changing his tone with a smirk. "And what family treasure are you here to pawn today? Watch carefully," I said, and pulled the glass cup out from inside my robe. The clerk's eyes went wide. He stared at it like he'd never seen anything so valuable, which, in this world, he probably hadn't. Then he looked back at me, rag clothes and all, and immediately decided I must have stolen it. "Which rich family did you take that from? Tell me the truth." I told him to go get his boss. He disappeared into the back room and came out a moment later, much more polite. "The owner would like to see you inside, sir." I walked in like I owned the place. The back room was nicely decorated. A middle-aged man sat drinking tea. When he saw me, he stood up immediately and offered me a seat, which told me everything I needed to know about how valuable that cup was. I sat down and dropped the glass cup onto his tea table without warning. He nearly spilled hot tea all over himself. "Please be careful with that," he said, looking genuinely pained. I almost laughed. Tempered glass. It wasn't going to break from a little drop. But his reaction confirmed it. This thing was worth serious money. He picked it up carefully and turned it over in his hands. "Permanent sale or temporary?" he asked. "Permanent. As permanent as it gets," I said. "I need money fast. Had a rough few days at the tables, if you know what I mean. Not easy parting with this." His face relaxed into a smile. He'd figured me out. Rich kid who gambled, sneaked something from home, came in disguise to cash it out. In his mind, I was easy to deal with. I'll be honest with you, he said, holding up 5 fingers. This kind of item is hard to move quickly. 5,000 taels, I said immediately. Done, he laughed. Let's be serious. 500. Final offer, 500 taels. I did the math in my head. 1 tael equaled 1,000 copper coins, and rice was around 5 coins a shum. This cup could buy a mountain of rice. Not bad, but I wasn't done. Don't try to lowball me, I said. 800, and that's already me giving you a deal because I'm in a hurry. We went back and forth from there. Eventually, we landed on 600 taels. I signed the paperwork and walked out carrying a bag so heavy I could barely lift it. My uncle was pacing outside, ready to charge in after me. I thought you'd found a gambling house in there, he said. Uncle, it's a pawn shop. Can't you read the sign? He gave me a look. Our family hasn't been able to read for generations. Only your father and you ever learned a single character. Right. I'd forgotten. I handed him the bag. Here, you carry it. Too heavy. He opened it, looked inside, and nearly fell over. Silver. More silver than he'd seen in his entire life. He snapped it shut and looked around nervously like someone was about to rob us. Nephew, where did this come from? I told him the same story I told Qinglian. The old man with the white beard from my dream had taught me healing arts, and I'd cured the pawn shop owner's long-standing illness. This was the payment. My uncle stared at me. Then his eyes went distant, and I could see him putting it together in his head. White-bearded immortal, magical healing, chosen disciple. He started to kneel right there in the street. I grabbed his arm. The old man told me specifically not to make a scene about it. If word gets out, he takes the gift back. My uncle froze, then slowly straightened up, looking deeply relieved he hadn't made noise. He clutched the bag to his chest like it was a baby. So where do we go now? He asked quietly. I looked at him. In the original Chu Chen's memories, this man had never once turned his back on the family after the scholar father died. He'd brought grain when there was none, lent money without being asked, never once complained. His wife had been the same way with Qinglian, taking her along to find work, helping however she could. Good people. They deserved better than scraping by in that village. Uncle, I said, can you drive a cart? Of course. I was a supply driver in the army. Hauled grain wagons for years. Good. We're buying a cart. His face fell. You're spending it already? We found the stable yard, and I walked around looking at the horses while a young attendant followed us. When he quoted me 100 taels for a fine horse, I nearly choked. 100 taels for one animal. Ancient Rolls-Royce prices. I looked at my uncle. He stepped in smoothly and told the attendant we just needed something for basic trips between the village and city. Nothing fancy. The attendant nodded and led us to a different pen. My uncle picked out a mule with a cart attached. 30 taels total. I shook my head a little looking at it. But honestly, it was practical. Tough, reliable, low maintenance. The little workhorse of ancient transportation. Like a good cheap van that never breaks down. What I didn't realize yet was that even this mule cart would make us look wealthy by village standards. Most families were lucky to share a single ox cart. I handed over 3 silver ingots, climbed onto the cart, and let my uncle take the reins. Where to now? He called back. The market, I said. Let's go. Our first stop was the market. We bought 200 pounds of rice and half a rack of lamb. I noticed there was no pork anywhere. Apparently in this era nobody ate pig because of the smell. Back in my world, even I knew that piglets needed to be castrated early or the meat came out wrong. This world just hadn't figured that out yet. After the market, we headed to a clothing shop. My space was full of modern clothes, but I couldn't exactly walk around ancient China in a hoodie and jeans. The shop owner greeted us warmly. Then, almost immediately, a loud voice cut through the shop. Excuse me, shopkeeper. Do you let beggars in here now? A woman, easily over 200 pounds, was holding her sleeve over her nose and glaring at me and my uncle. My uncle quietly stepped outside. I stayed and kept looking at the clothes. She kept going. Don't touch those. You think you can afford anything here? I turned and looked at her slowly. Is this your shop? I asked. I had my eye on that piece you just touched, she said, turning to the shopkeeper. I don't want it now. He's ruined it. The shopkeeper looked at me apologetically. She was clearly a regular big-spending customer. I looked her over calmly. Have you looked in a mirror lately? You're about to become perfectly round. And that smell, when did you last bathe? And honestly, the way you've been walking, you should really see a doctor. That itching won't go away on its own. Careful it's not something serious. She went red as a beet. Her mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. I turned back to the shopkeeper. Everything I touched, wrap it up. Everything she touched, keep it away from me. I don't want to catch anything. The shopkeeper stared at the woman. Then he looked back at me with wide eyes. Was she actually sick? She had touched quite a few items already. The woman grabbed her face, turned around, and marched straight into the medical clinic across the street. The other customers in the shop quietly slipped out one by one, not wanting to be near whatever she might have. The shopkeeper leaned toward me with a big smile. You must be a great physician, sir. You could tell just by looking at her. I almost laughed out loud. I wasn't a doctor. She smelled bad and walked funny. I just said what was obvious. But then I looked at the shopkeeper more carefully. He was heavy-set, walking a little unsteady, looked tired in a specific way I recognized. Your complexion isn't great either, I told him. You've been feeling weaker than usual lately, haven't you? Not quite able to finish what you start. His face went pale. Then desperate. Please, you have to help me, he said, and actually knelt down in front of me. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I told him his condition was a recognized medical problem, that I would go back to my mountain, prepare a special remedy, and bring it next time I was in the city. My space had several pharmacy sections with all kinds of health supplements. This would be easy. The shopkeeper was so grateful he refused to take any money for the clothes. He just begged me not to forget his medicine. I grabbed everything, the clothes plus several bolts of fabric, called my uncle in to help carry it, and climbed back onto the mule cart. As we rolled through the gate and out of the city, my uncle started asking me what else the white-bearded immortal had taught me besides healing. I gave him vague answers and turned away before he could ask more. One more question, and the whole story would fall apart. But when I turned my head, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Several large men were walking behind our cart. Not close, but following. Definitely following. I ran through the possibilities. The pawn shop owner? The woman from the clothing store? The shopkeeper? Most likely the pawn shop. 600 taels was a lot of money, and the owner probably hadn't fully believed my story. He'd sent people after us. My uncle had a soldier's background, but his leg was damaged. And this body of mine was still half broken from the beating. We couldn't fight our way out of this. I thought fast, then called out to my uncle. Stop the cart. I need to go. He grumbled the same thing as before about lazy people always needing to go at the wrong time, but he stopped. I jogged into the trees. Once I was out of sight, I slipped into my space. I went straight to the building I'd noticed before, the one that looked like a government facility. I found a room marked equipment storage and pushed the door. It opened easily. Inside were rows of modern gear, all frozen in place from the moment I crossed over. I looked everything over carefully. Guns and high-tech equipment were too risky. If anyone saw something like that, it would cause enormous problems I wasn't ready for. I picked up a combat knife and an electric stun baton. Then, just to be safe, I tucked a handgun somewhere hidden on my body. I walked back out, climbed onto the cart, and settled in. Behind us, those men were still there, slowly keeping pace. The mule cart rounded a bend in an empty stretch of road. A man in black stood blocking the path ahead, arms folded behind his back, looking very pleased with himself. My uncle stiffened on the driver's seat. Nephew, he said quietly, I think we're being robbed. He told me to take the silver and run while he held them off. This man, bad leg and all, was ready to put himself between me and armed robbers without a second thought. I pretended to look scared, then climbed down from the cart with my stun baton in hand and slipped the combat knife to my uncle. 3 more men burst out from behind the cart. We were surrounded. I called out to the man in black. What's the problem, friend? Why are you blocking our road? He seemed surprised I was calm. Times are tight, he said smoothly. Lend us a little something. Look at how we're dressed, I said. Don't you have richer targets to pick from? He laughed. That's not your concern. Leave the cart and you can walk away. I held up the stun baton and took a guess. How much did the pawn shop owner pay you? Go back and kill him instead. I'll pay double. All 4 of them went still. I'd hit the mark. We weren't planning to kill anyone today, the man in black said, his voice changing. But now that you know, you don't get to leave, he waved his hand. Blades came out. They closed in. My uncle shoved me behind him, knife raised, ready to take the first hit himself. I shouted for them to wait. They paused, curious, I think, more than anything. Last words? The leader said. No, I said. I just want to show you something. I held the stun baton out toward him. He reached for it, curious. I jabbed it forward and hit the switch. He dropped like a stone, shaking on the ground. Before the others could react, I lunged at the next man. He tried to grab someone nearby as a shield, which just meant two of them went down twitching at once. My uncle had already buried the knife into the last man's thigh. I crossed the distance and touched the baton to him before he could scream again. All four down. My uncle stared at me like I'd just performed magic. I didn't explain. I told him to drag them into the trees quickly before anyone came by. He didn't argue. We pulled all four into the undergrowth. Then I took the knife back from my uncle and cut their throats, one after another, clean and fast. My uncle, a man who had seen real battlefields, looked shaken. They saw the weapon, I said simply. They couldn't be allowed to leave. We covered the drag marks as best we could. I looked up. The sky had gone dark with heavy clouds. Rain was coming, and coming fast. By the time anyone found anything, there would be nothing left to trace back to us. We got back on the cart and moved. My uncle kept staring at the baton. Was that also a gift from the immortal? Yes, I said. And this knife, he turned it over in his hands, testing the edge. Even in the dim light, you could see it was nothing like anything made in this era. This is a divine weapon, isn't it? Sure, I said. Keep it. It's yours. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Something this valuable. You've looked after me my whole life, I said. It's just a knife. He went quiet, then tucked it carefully inside his robe. He didn't say another word the whole way home, just sat up straight and drove the cart with a small, satisfied look on his face. By the time we reached the village entrance, it was fully dark. A group of about 10 villagers were sitting under the old locust tree the way they always did in the evenings, the village's unofficial news center. Someone spotted the cart and called out. Who was this wealthy family coming to the village? Then they recognized my uncle holding the reins, and the noise erupted all at once. Isn't that Chu Dazhuang? He's driving a mule cart. Didn't he go to the city this morning with that wastrel nephew of his? Did they actually make money? An older man called out to my uncle asking where he'd gotten rich. My uncle sat up straighter than I'd ever seen him. It's my nephew's cart. I couldn't afford anything like this. I climbed out and greeted everyone. A few of them congratulated me. One old man shook his head and said that now that I had money, I should use it sensibly and stop throwing it around on flashy things. I just smiled and kept walking. My reputation as the village wastrel was well established. Nothing I said tonight was going to change that. I turned toward our little broken-down house at the end of the path. Even from a distance, through the dark, I could see a small, thin figure standing in the doorway, looking out in the direction I would come from. She'd been waiting. That small figure waiting in the doorway hit me harder than I expected. The cart stopped, and I jumped down and pulled Qinglian into a hug before I even thought about it. She pushed me off immediately, flustered. Your uncle is right there. I cleared my throat and asked my uncle to help unload. He answered loudly, grateful for something to do. I shook my head. This world was so conservative. Qinglian was too thin anyway. I'd worry about that later. First things first, get her fed properly. My uncle carried in rice, cloth, and clothes. Halfway through I stopped him. I set aside about 50 pounds of rice, a whole lamb leg, and a bolt of fabric. Then I pressed a tin-tail silver ingot into his hand. Take this home. Have Auntie make you both some proper clothes. He stared at the pile. Nephew, I can't accept all this. You stood in front of me today when those men had blades out, I said. That's worth more than this. Stop arguing and go home. Auntie and your son are waiting. And tell your son to come by tomorrow. He didn't fully understand the word I used. I'd said something too modern, but the meaning got through. He gathered everything up and headed home, walking a little taller than when we'd left. Qinglian stood looking at what remained, speechless. Stop staring, I told her. Go cook. I'm starving. Make plenty. She didn't ask where any of it came from. She just turned and went to the kitchen. While she was busy, I slipped into the cart and brought out several duvets and some basic supplies from my space, then carried them inside. When I came back to check on dinner, there was noticeably more meat on the table than the night before. I told her she was improving and needed to keep eating more herself. She was too thin and her body was weak. She started worrying out loud about how much everything must have cost, the cart included. I could hear the anxiety underneath the question. I told her to stop overthinking it. An immortal had opened my eyes and given me abilities. Strange things were going to keep happening. She didn't need to understand all of it. She just needed to eat well and trust me. That seemed to settle her, at least for now. When the temperature dropped that night, I had her help me bring the duvets in from the cart. She touched one and just stood there. A farm girl who had never been past the county town. She'd never felt anything like it. She assumed it was some expensive city product, which was close enough to the truth for my purposes. I told her to get in bed, that I'd be back in a moment. Outside at the cart, I tested something I'd been curious about. I took 500 taels from the bag, held it, and stepped into my space. The bag came with me. I nearly shouted. This meant I could store this world's money and goods in my space. No more carrying silver around. No more worrying about being robbed. The space just kept getting more useful. I left 500 taels inside and came back out with 10 ingots of 10 taels each. Then I walked into the bedroom. Qinglian was sitting on the bed, staring at the duvets with a distant look. I dropped all 10 ingots onto the bedboards one at a time. They landed with a satisfying series of thuds. She jumped. I grinned at her. 100 taels. Want to keep me company tonight? Her face went completely red. I almost laughed. Too easy. Then her eyes moved from me to the silver on the bed and stayed there. She asked where it came from, her voice quiet. I told her I'd treated a wealthy man's illness in the city, and this was his payment. She started crying. She told me through tears to hide it quickly before someone found out and came to take it. I stood there looking at her. She'd been holding this family together alone, going out every day to do other people's chores for a handful of copper coins, eating rice water while feeding me proper meals, never once complaining. And now there was more money on this bed than she had probably seen in her entire life combined. Of course, she was overwhelmed. The surprise was that she hadn't fainted. I told her it was hers to keep. For emergencies, for whatever she needed. She shook her head hard. Too much, she said. I should keep it. I put my hands on her shoulders and looked at her directly. Qinglian, our situation has changed. We're not the people we were last week. I need you to start believing that, okay? She didn't understand every word I used, but she nodded, wiping her eyes. I reached up and dried her face with my hand. Tomorrow morning, I said quietly, I want to see a confident woman walk out of this room. Not someone apologizing for existing. Yes, she said. Whatever you say. She was looking at me the way she hadn't looked at me before, like she was seeing someone new, and wasn't sure yet whether to believe it, but wanted to. I pointed to the pile of clothes and fabric in the corner. Those clothes are for you. I didn't know your size, so check if they fit. If not, give what doesn't work to your aunt. And the fabric is for you to make me a few sets of clothes when you have time. She looked at the pile. She'd thought the fabric was just for me. It hadn't occurred to her that I might have bought clothes for her too. More than one set. Her eyes filled again. I gave her a look. She held it in. I thought to myself, taking someone from barely surviving to having more than enough isn't something that happens overnight. She would need time to adjust to this new life. She sat there holding a stack of clothes, looking at them like she still wasn't sure they were real. Qinglian was still sitting there holding the clothes when I noticed she wasn't moving. Try them on, I said. What are you waiting for? She went red and looked at the floor. Husband, I need to change, so change. You don't need to ask permission. She went redder. Then it hit me. The original Chu Chun had never once been a real husband to her. Not once in over a year of marriage had he even looked at her properly. She didn't know how to act around a man who was actually present. Qinglian, I said, we're husband and wife. There's nothing to be shy about. She realized I wasn't leaving and slowly accepted it. When her clothes came off, I felt two things at once. Something I definitely wasn't going to act on, and a deep, uncomfortable guilt. Her back and arms were covered in bruises. Dark purple, some greenish yellow. All of them from the man whose body I was now living in. I turned and walked out. When I came back, I was carrying a small jar of ointment from the pharmacy in my space. I told her it was a healing medicine from my master in the dream. She lay down without question, and I carefully applied it to every bruise, every mark. I held myself together. We slept that night with her in my arms, both of us wrapped in the duvet. Warm, quiet still. I didn't push anything further. Those bruises were reason enough to wait. She slept deeply. I could tell it was the best sleep she'd had in a long time. The next morning, someone nearly knocked our door off its hinges. Stop banging, I shouted from bed. It's going to fall apart. I let Qinglian get dressed first, then opened the door. Standing outside in the gray pre-dawn light was a very large young man. My uncle's son, Chu Xiaohu, known as Huzi. A year older than me, built like a small ox. Growing up, he'd always followed the original Chu-Chin around, acting as a human wall in every village fight. And whenever they got into trouble, Huzi took the blame since he was the older one. Huzi, I said, it's barely light out. What are you doing here? He squinted at me. Something's wrong with your mouth. Before I could answer, he tackled me to the ground, pinned me down, and started pressing on my upper lip while shouting for Qinglian to come quickly because I'd been poisoned. I couldn't move. He was enormous. I made muffled sounds into the dirt. Qinglian came running out, with her own toothbrush in her mouth, foaming slightly. Huzi let go of me, took one look at her, and charged at her instead. She screamed and ran. I gasped for air and yelled at him to stop. I was brushing my teeth. The white foam is toothpaste. Stop chasing her. He froze and turned around. You weren't poisoned? No. Then why were you both foaming at the mouth? I had no words. My uncle and aunt came rushing over from next door. They'd heard Huzi shouting about poison. I explained toothbrushing to all three of them. Twice. My aunt went to help Qinglian with breakfast. My uncle tried to take Huzi home. Huzi refused to leave. His eyes were locked on the lamb meat visible through the kitchen doorway. His father had brought home a leg the night before, but had cut only a small piece and said to save the rest. Huzi had barely tasted it. I told them all to stay for breakfast and asked Qinglian to cook for 5. While the women were in the kitchen, I turned to my uncle. I want to hire Huzi, I said. 5 taels a month, plus food. My uncle looked like I'd said something absurd. He's not worth 5 taels. You need help? Just tell him to come. Family doesn't need paying. He's working for me, so I pay him, I said. If he does well, he keeps it all. If he slacks off, I take some back. My uncle went quiet for a moment, doing the math in his head. 5 taels a month was 60 taels a year. Most farming families didn't see that in several years of hard work. Your money's too generous, he muttered. He's like a brother to me, I said. That's reason enough. Huzi, any objections? Huzi had stopped pretending to look anywhere except the kitchen. 5 taels a month, free food, and clearly no shortage of lamb. He had absolutely no objections. My aunt called us in for breakfast. A big pot of noodles and lamb broth came out, and everyone grabbed a bowl. My uncle and Huzi took theirs and squatted on the doorstep. I watched Huzi tilt his bowl and drain it in one smooth circular motion. Then refill it. Then do it again. For full bowls of noodles before he slowed down. Even then his eyes drifted straight to the large piece of lamb still sitting in the broth pot. My uncle and aunt looked like they wanted to disappear. I noticed something else too. Nobody touched the lamb meat. Even with it sitting right there in the pot. They all just drank the broth around it. Waiting for me to say something, I realized. Old habits. When you've gone hungry long enough, you stop reaching for things, even when they're in front of you. I picked up the ladle and put lamb in everyone's bowl without asking. Then I looked at Qinglian and gave her a thumbs up. She'd actually cooked the meat this time instead of saving it for later. I handed the rest of the pot directly to Huzi. Huzi, follow me and do what I say, and I can't promise meat every single day, but every few days, you eat until you can't move. He wasn't listening. He was already eating. My uncle and aunt exchanged a look that said, he's like this, please be patient. I didn't mind. I was thinking about their names. Chu Dazhuang, big strong Chu. Wang Ernie, second girl Wang. Chu Xiaohu, little tiger Chu. Nobody in this family had put much effort into naming. Huzi set down the pot and let out a long, satisfied belch. Then a voice drifted in from outside. Smooth and unpleasant. Heard the great Chu Chun came into money. Looks like it's true. Lamb for breakfast and everything. Ma San was walking toward the house with a group of men behind him. One of them I didn't recognize. Bigger, harder looking, with the easy confidence of someone who hurt people for a living. The debt collectors. Right on schedule. I called out loudly, loud enough for the whole village to hear. Ma San, brought a crowd with you. Did the village chief's wife finally find out? That brought people out of their houses. Within a minute, we had a circle of onlookers. Ma San's face tightened, but he kept walking. He leaned over to the hard-looking man beside him and said something, then smiled at me. This is Brother Long from Sanha gambling house in town. You borrowed 5 taels. Time to pay. Brother Long looked our group over slowly. His gaze landed on Qinglian and stayed there in a way I didn't like at all. 5 taels borrowed, he said. With interest it's 8. Hand it over. 8 taels on a 5-tael debt in a few days. That was how they trapped people. How whole families ended up selling their children. I reached into my robe and pulled out a 10-tael silver ingot. The crowd went quiet. 8 taels, no problem, I said. But I don't have smaller change. Can you make change for 10? The whispering started immediately. People had seen me come home in a mule cart the night before. They'd smelled the lamb cooking that morning. Now a 10-tael ingot in my hand. The wastrel Chu-chun had actually made money. Ma San and Brother Long stared at the silver. I could see what they'd planned. Qing Lian as collateral. Ma San finally getting what he'd been after for a long time. That plan was falling apart. Actually, I said, I don't really mind giving you the whole 10. Doesn't bother me. More gasps from the crowd. The old image of me as the village's biggest spendthrift apparently died hard. Brother Long smiled and reached out his hand. I turned quietly to Huzi. How many of them can you handle? Just 8 4 bowls, he said. All of them. I slipped a knife into his hand without anyone seeing. Then I looked back at Brother Long. I'll pay you, I said pleasantly. But I remember the men who beat me half to death at your gambling house. You were there for that. Before we talk about money, shouldn't I get to hit back first? Seems fair. His smile disappeared. You're dead, kid. Boys, take it. Blades came out. They came at us. I stepped in front of Qing Lian and my aunt, stun baton in hand. My uncle and Huzi fanned out to either side, knives ready. 3 of us, solid ground behind us, doorway at our backs. Come on in, I said, and crooked a finger at Brother Long. He stopped. He was a man who'd been on the streets long enough to know the law. In the Great Xia dynasty, if someone forced their way into your home with a weapon and you killed them, you faced no charges. As long as they didn't cross the threshold, I couldn't legally touch them either. He pointed at me. Think you're smart. Come outside then. I'm comfortable in here, I said. You come in. And so we stood there. Him outside, me inside, neither of us able to do anything. The crowd watched for a while, decided nothing interesting was going to happen, and slowly drifted home. Huzi dragged a small stool to the doorway and sat down, watching Brother Long's men squat tiredly in the dirt and looking mildly disappointed that nobody was fighting. After about an hour, Brother Long stood up, jaw tight. You just wait, kid. You can't stay inside forever. I'll be in town tomorrow, I called back cheerfully, sipping tea. Come find me if you're feeling brave. He shot me one last look, the kind that meant this wasn't over, then caught Ma San's eye and jerked his head. The group turned and left. I watched them go and kept my face relaxed. But I knew that look. He was going to find a quieter moment. A darker road. A time without witnesses. I'd need to be ready. After Brother Long and his men left, I let out a long breath. Good. No weapons needed today. But this wasn't over. If I didn't deal with that gambling house, soon they'd keep coming back until I had no choice but to use things that would be very hard to explain. Tomorrow I'd go to the town and sort it out properly. My uncle and aunt headed home. I let Huzi go too. Nothing for him to do yet. I told Qing Lian I was going up the mountain for a bit and to stay home. In reality, I just needed somewhere private to enter my space. Disappearing in front of people was not something I was ready to explain to anyone. I found a quiet hollow in the hills and stepped in. I went straight to the government building. I'd remembered something. The day before I crossed over there had been a news report about a local station collecting confiscated illegal items. Crossbows, long blades, air rifles. If that news ran the day before I arrived here, those items hadn't been destroyed yet. I searched through the building until I found a storage room on one of the upper floors. I pushed the door open and grinned. The room was stacked with long swords, short blades, crossbows, arrows, air guns, everything. A full armory of confiscated weapons that this world would find completely normal. Modern firearms were too hard to explain. But a crossbow? A long sword? Nobody here would blink. I picked out a repeating crossbow and about 20 bolts, then strapped on a sword. For backup, I tucked my handgun out of sight under my robe. The ancient clothing was uncomfortable, so I'd been wearing jeans and a down jacket underneath the long outer robe. As long as nobody looked too closely, it was fine. I walked back down the hill in a good mood, humming to myself, sword over one shoulder, crossbow under my arm. Then I saw the crowd outside my house. I ran. Before I even got through the gate, I could hear shouting. You little tramp. I was kind enough to give you work, and this is how you repay me? Coming after me with that husband of yours. I pushed through the onlookers and stopped. Qing Lian was on the ground. There was a red handprint across her face. Standing over her with both hands on her hips was a sharp-faced woman with sunken cheekbones and fresh bruises on her own face. The village chief's wife. I understood immediately. My shouting that morning about her and Ma Sin must have carried to the village chief's ears. He'd come home and dealt with her. Now she'd come here to take it out on Qinglian. I stepped forward and helped Qinglian up, then looked at the woman coldly. I was just thinking, I said, that you can really tell a person's character from their face. Thin cheeks, sharp bones. They say that means a cruel heart. I'm genuinely curious what Ma San saw in you. The crowd laughed. This woman had been throwing her weight around as the village chief's wife for years, bullying other women, talking down to everyone. Nobody had ever talked back to her like this. She screamed that she'd tear my mouth off and lunged at me. I was still healing, but I wasn't going to let a woman knock me over. I kicked her legs out from under her, and she went down hard. She immediately started wailing on the ground, calling for her husband, calling for witnesses, rolling around for dramatic effect. The village chief pushed through the crowd. He wasn't happy. His wife, or not, getting publicly embarrassed was bad for his authority. Chu Chun, he said, coming at me, attacking your elders in broad daylight. I raised the long sword between us. Uncle Wang, I said calmly, your wife came to my home and hit my wife first. What did you expect me to do? He looked at the sword and stopped. He'd heard what I'd been up to the past few days. Money, a mule cart, connections in the city. Men who suddenly come into wealth like that sometimes have powerful people behind them. He wasn't sure what he was dealing with anymore. I lowered my voice and spoke to him directly. She's not good for you, Uncle Wang. A man of your position, village chief, letting his wife sneak around with the local layabout. That's not right. Then I turned and sniffed the air near his wife in an exaggerated way. Uncle Wang, I'd go see a doctor today if I were you. That smell, I've encountered it before. You don't want to let that kind of problem sit too long. The color drained from both their faces at once. His wife had clearly already been feeling something wrong since her encounter with Ma San. And the village chief, I could see it in his face, had noticed the same smell himself these past few days. Several men at the edges of the crowd quietly stepped backward and slipped away without a word. The village chief grabbed his wife by the hair and dragged her out of the crowd without another word to me, his face dark as a thunderstorm. I turned to the remaining onlookers, mostly women. Ladies, I said pleasantly, I'd suggest having the men in your households visit a doctor this week. Just to be safe, I took Qinglian's hand and walked back inside. Behind us the crowd exploded. Where's my husband? He was just here. You come back here right now. I sat down inside and laughed until my ribs hurt. On the hill behind my house, hidden in the trees, someone was watching. I'd spotted Ma San up there when I went to the hills yesterday. He hadn't seen me notice him. I brought Qinglian inside and apologized for what happened with the village chief's wife. She smiled and said she was fine, but then immediately started worrying about the people I'd made enemies of, Brother Long, Ma San, the village chief. What if they came back while I was gone? I picked up the crossbow, loaded a bolt, and fired it into the old tea tree by the door. The bolt sank deep into the hard wood, the tail still trembling. Don't worry about me, I told her. I put the crossbow in her hands. I was going to the town tomorrow, and I needed her to have something. Anyone who stepped through our door while I was gone, shoot them. The law was on her side. She tried to refuse, said I should keep it for myself. I told her I had more where that came from. Eventually she accepted it. I spent the rest of the evening teaching her how to load and fire it. She picked it up faster than I expected. That night she lay awake next to me, restless, asking me not to go. She'd already figured out what I was planning. Go to the town, deal with Brother Long directly. End this before it grew into something worse. If I don't handle this now, I told her, it never goes away. Sleep. She didn't sleep much. I could tell. In the morning I woke to the sound of roosters and found her already in the kitchen. We ate breakfast together. Then I looked toward the back hill and let a small smile cross my face where she couldn't see it. I took 2 tin-tail silver ingots and started tossing them in my hand. Obvious, flashy, impossible to miss. Then I went to my uncle's house and left the long sword with Huzi, told him to keep an eye on the house while I went into the hills. If anything happened, he'd be close by. Then I walked out toward the hills, tossing the silver visibly, making sure Ma Sen saw every toss. I passed right behind where he was hiding without him noticing me. Then I looped through the trees and took the back route toward town. Behind me, Ma Sen scrambled to his feet the moment he saw me heading toward town. He ran straight for Qingyo town to warn Brother Long, never once questioning why I'd gone through the trees instead of taking the road. Exactly as planned. At the gambling house, Ma Sen burst in gasping and told Brother Long I was on my way to town with at least 20 taels on me. Brother Long grabbed a steamed bun off the table and stood up. Let's go make some money, boys. He headed out with Ma San and 3 others. Meanwhile, I'd stepped into my space and come back out fully equipped. Body armor under my robe, anti-stab gloves, riot helmet on my head, handgun on my hip, stun baton, combat knife, spare magazines strapped to my belt. I settled into the trees along the road to town and waited. Less than half an hour later, I heard footsteps. I looked out and counted, Brother Long in front, 4 men behind him, Ma Sen among them. All of them, together. That meant Qinglian was safe at home. I waited until they were close. Then I started singing loudly from the trees. On the hill across the way there were 2 cows, and the bull said to the cow, "I love you." They all jumped. Brother Long spun toward the trees. "Who's in there?" I stepped into view, looked at them with wide eyes. "Brother Long." "Ma San, what are you 5 doing out here so early? Rushing off somewhere? Don't tell me you're in that much of a hurry to be reborn." Brother Long's face went red. "Get him," they all charged. I turned and ran deep into the hills. Ma San was yelling behind me to stop running like a coward. "You think I'm going to stand still while you hit me?" I called back over my shoulder. "What do you think I am?" They chased me for about half an hour before my body gave out. I stopped, hands on my knees, genuinely out of breath. The healing wounds weren't helping. They stopped about 10 meters away, equally winded but trying not to show it. "Out of places to run," Brother Long said. I didn't answer him. I was talking to myself quietly. 8 bullets. 5 people. Should be more than enough. I reached to my hip and pulled out the handgun. They stared at the black object in my hand, none of them quite sure what they were looking at. Brother Long's eyes narrowed. "What is that thing?" "Brother Long," I said, catching my breath. "Let's talk." "What would it take to make this go away?" He smiled. He thought he had me scared. "Hand over the mule cart, your wife, and 100 taels. Then we forget everything." I nodded slowly. 100 taels, sure. The cart's yours. And as for the woman, well, Ma San's been wanting that for a while anyway, right? Ma San perked up immediately. "Now you're being smart," he said. "Should have done this from the start." "Come closer then," I said. "Let me show you something nice." I raised the handgun. They didn't know what it was. Brother Long waved his hand, and they all moved in. At 5 meters, I pulled the trigger. The sound cracked through the trees. Brother Long dropped straight back, a hole in his forehead, eyes still open. Ma San spun around, grabbed the man next to him, and shoved him forward as a shield, screaming about hidden weapons. My second shot was meant for Ma San. Instead, it hit the man he'd pulled in front of himself. The remaining 2 came at me with long swords. One slashed at my head. The blade hit my riot helmet, and the impact rattled my skull hard. I shook it off, turned, and shot him before he could swing again. The last man saw that his blade had done nothing and ran. Ma San ran too. 2 shots. Both down. I walked over to the sword man and put 1 more bullet in him to be certain. Then I walked slowly toward Ma San. He was on the ground holding his side, making long, horrible sounds. "Don't kill me, Chu-chun." I was wrong. "Please." I crouched down in front of him. "We have no quarrel," he said. "Why are you doing this?" "No quarrel." This man had brought the original Chu-chun to the gambling house, helped destroy his family, and had been after Qinglian for years. And he called that no quarrel. "Tell me," I said quietly. "Why did you bring me to the gambling house?" He said it was Brother Long's idea. That Brother Long had seen Qinglian and wanted her, so they'd set up the gambling trap to get at her. I knew that was half a lie. Ma San had wanted her himself for a long time. Brother Long was probably just a convenient excuse. But it didn't matter anymore. He'd seen the gun. That alone was reason enough. "All right," I said, "since you've been so honest with me." He actually looked relieved for a second. I pulled out my combat knife. "Take a deep breath," I told him. "You'll want the air." He understood what was coming 1 moment too late. I cut his throat cleanly and wiped the blade on his clothes. Then I walked back toward the village, relaxed, taking my time. An hour later, I was lying flat on the hillside behind the village with the crossbow, watching a small wild boar and her 3 piglets drinking from the stream below. 1 bolt. Clean shot to the head. The mother dropped without a sound. The piglets scattered straight into the net I'd already set up. This had been the plan all along. The bodies in the trees would be found eventually. I needed to be somewhere else when that happened, somewhere visible, with witnesses. So that morning I'd deliberately gone through the hills on my way out and back, giving myself a reason to be in those woods that had nothing to do with 5 dead men. I stuffed the piglets into a sack, tied a rope around the boar's legs, and dragged her down. I stuck the combat knife into the boar's body a few times to make the wound pattern look more like a trap kill, then packed away my weapons and strolled back toward the village. At the edge of the back hill, I shouted for Hoosie. People working in the fields looked up. They saw me coming down with a sack on my back and something large and dark being dragged behind me. Hoosie came running with his sword out, then stopped and stared. "You caught that yourself?" "Spotted her yesterday when I was up there," I said, looking tired. "Set a rope trap at dawn. Just got lucky." A crowd gathered quickly. One of the older men, Uncle Lou, looked the boar over and said catching a wild boar without facing it head-on was real skill. He asked how I'd done it. I told him I'd learned a trapping technique and would teach everyone. Then I said the boar was for the whole village, a thank you for how people had looked out for me since my father died. The crowd cheered. Uncle Lou shook his head in happy disbelief. "This thing's big, but it won't stretch far across the whole village." "You really mean it? You've all been good to me," I said. "And I haven't always deserved it. That's changing." They carried the boar into the village with everyone shouting and laughing. And I walked along with them, smiling quietly to myself. Because when the bodies were eventually found and someone came asking questions, every person in this village would be able to say exactly where I'd been, and there'd be wild boar in their stomachs to prove it. Outside my house, the whole village had come alive. Someone had set up a big iron pot over a fire, and people were gathering around, loud and happy. Qinglian came to me the moment I got back, searching my face. I was in one piece. There was a wild boar. There were 3 live piglets in a sack. She's smart. She figured out the rest without me saying it. I handed her the piglets and told her to find somewhere to keep them. She said pig meat tasted bad. I told her I had a plan for that. Raising pigs could become a real source of income once I sorted out a few things. She didn't ask more questions. Then she asked quietly if everything had been taken care of. "No one will bother us again," I said, and went back outside. I found Hoosie and gave him 10 taels. Told him to take the mule cart to town and buy grain and wine. A whole village of 100 people couldn't be fed on one boar. His eyes lit up at the word wine, and he was gone before I finished talking. I stood watching the crowd bustle around the fire and felt something settle in my chest. Then I noticed I'd forgotten someone important. The village chief, Wang Defa. If officials ever came asking about bodies found in the hills, the first person they'd go through was the village chief. Yesterday, I'd publicly embarrassed him. That was a problem. A man like him, with just enough authority to make life difficult. I needed him on my side, or at least not against me. I went into my space and came out with 10 pounds of rice and 5 pounds of lamb, then knocked on his door. He opened it with a sour look. But when he saw the rice and the meat, his expression shifted in spite of himself. "I came to apologize for yesterday," I said, holding out the food, "and to invite you to come eat with us. I caught a wild boar this morning. Uncle Lou and the others have a pot going at my place right now." He tried to look unmoved. He didn't quite manage it. This was a man who ate meat once a year at New Year's. 5 pounds of lamb was 5 pounds of lamb. "You didn't have to bring anything," he said, already reaching for it. I headed back to my house. By now the smell coming from the pot was making everyone's mouths water. Hoosie had returned from town with grain and supplies and was handing back the leftover copper coins. I told the men who'd gone with him to split it among themselves. They beamed and started unloading the cart twice as fast. Tables and stools appeared from every house in the village, set up in the open ground outside. By midday there were enough seats for everyone. When the village chief arrived, the noise level went up another notch. Everyone was happy, everyone was loud, and for the first time in a long time this little village felt genuinely warm despite the cold coming in from the hills. Hoosie had bought millet in town and steamed a huge pot of it. Every table had a small jar of wine. Not much, just a pound or 2 each. In this era, that was already a luxury. Most people only tasted wine at New Year. I poured myself a cup and tried it. Thin, barely any flavor at all. I went back inside, came out with several bottles of Regrettable from my space, and poured them into a large water barrel, diluting it heavily so it wouldn't seem too out of place. Then I had Hoosie and the others carry it out. The village chief looked at the barrel approvingly. "You've really done well for yourself, haven't you? This much wine must have cost a fortune." "Just a little something," I said, and poured him a cup of the diluted Regrettable. He took a sip, stopped, looked at the cup. Chu-chun, he said slowly, this wine. The village chief stopped mid-sip and looked at his cup. My heart jumped. Even watered down, the Erguo was in a completely different league from anything brewed in this era. You got this from the city, didn't you? He said. Nothing in town tastes like this. I breathed out quietly, just surprised by the quality, not suspicious. Brought a little back last time I was there, I said. I'll send some home with you later. He beamed, stood up, and addressed the whole village. Said what a fine man my father had been. Said I'd clearly turned myself around. Told everyone to remember kindness and look out for each other. I almost laughed. A week ago this man barely acknowledged my existence. Money changes the way people talk about you very fast. When he sat down I stood up, raised my cup, said I'd been a mess before, but wasn't anymore, and left it at that. One short toast. That was enough. Then the food and the diluted Erguo did the rest. People ate and drank and talked louder and louder. The compliments kept coming from every direction. The feast ran from midday all the way to nightfall. I slipped away early, using the excuse that I couldn't hold my drink. Qinglian came in soon after and sat beside me. You did all of this to keep people quiet, she said. It wasn't a question. This woman was sharper than anyone gave her credit for. I just don't like unnecessary trouble, I told her and pulled her close. But lying there looking at the gaps in the thatched roof with cold air coming through, I made up my mind. This shack had to go. The next morning, I went back to the village chief's door with another jar of the watered-down Erguo. He accepted it before I finished offering it. Once we were inside, I told him what I wanted. The open land in front of my house. I wanted to buy it and build properly. And the back hill. I wanted that too. He asked how much land. About 10 acres out front, I said, and roughly 50 acres of hillside behind. He stared at me. Even wealthy city families didn't claim that much ground. I had my own reasons. Back in my old life, I'd lived in a tiny rented room barely big enough to turn around in. I'd crossed into another world with a shopping mall in my pocket. I was going to build something worth living in. The village chief thought it over, or pretended to, then told me that 50 acres was normally too much for one person, but given my father's contributions to the village, he'd allow it. 10 silver per flat acre, he said, dropping it from 12 as a favor. He'll land at 1 tael per acre instead of 2. A few well-placed words from him, and I was saving 50 taels. Village chiefs were useful to have on your side. I handed him 5 taels for the trouble and 80 for the land. He was out the door and heading to the town office before I could say anything else. I sent Huzi with the mule cart to drive him there. The village chief sat in the back looking like he was the county magistrate himself. I did the math while they were gone. 600 taels from the glass cup. 100 given to Qinglian. Another 100 or so spent since then. 80 for the land. That left around 300 taels. Building what I had in mind was going to take more. Tomorrow I'd go back to the city and sell something else. Qinglian came to stand beside me as I looked out at the hillside behind our shack. What are you planning now? She asked. Look at that hill, I said. What do you see? Land, she said. Good land for farming. We're not farming it. She looked confused. I'm turning the ground out front into our house, I said. The hill becomes our garden. She went quiet, doing the numbers in her head, arriving somewhere that made her look alarmed. That's a lot of money, she said. And it's just the two of us. We don't need something so big. I'll buy you a few maids from the city when it's done, I told her. Your only job will be to look beautiful. I don't need maids, she said firmly. I can take care of you myself. She meant it completely sincerely. That was just who she was. I smiled. Don't worry about the money. You married an immortal's disciple, remember? Just wait and enjoy it. I took her hand and walked her back inside. That evening the village chief came back with the paperwork. I signed it and held the land deed in my hands. Landowner. In this world, that meant something. This was just the first step, though. I wasn't planning to stay in Mashan village forever. Someday, I'd move into the wider world. This place would just be a quiet retreat to come back to. That night, Huzi and the village chief drank themselves sideways while I sat nearby watching. The Erguo from my convenience store was not something I was going to be casually knocking back in large quantities. Too easy to accidentally do something stupid. After they staggered home, Qinglian and I washed up and went to bed. Same as usual. I held her. Nothing more. She'd been patient about it, but that night she finally said something. We'd been married over a year, she pointed out. People in the village were going to start talking. I told her I wanted to wait until the new house was built, that this broken-down shack was no place for that kind of moment. She accepted it, though I could tell she was puzzled. Truthfully, I was struggling more than I let on. Before crossing over, I'd been a guy with no girlfriend and no prospects. Day one in this feudal world, I told myself I was going to live well. But looking at Qinglian, I genuinely didn't want their first time to be on a straw mat in a leaking shack. Some things deserved better than that. I lay there talking myself down and decided that tomorrow I'd go to the city for a few days and find a different kind of distraction. Morning came fast. After a quick breakfast, I told Qinglian I'd be in Qinglian City for a few days, got Huzi on the cart, and we were off. Huzi had fully settled into his role. Long sword at his hip, sitting up straight on the driver's seat, pushing the mule faster than my uncle ever had. The cart had no suspension and every bump went straight through my spine, but I wasn't going to complain. An hour at that speed, and we were at the city gate. A few copper coins later, we were inside. I stopped at a street stall and bought a small clay bottle. Into it, I dropped a few tablets I'd brought from the pharmacy section of my space, specific ones, chosen carefully. Then I headed to the clothing shop. Fat Tao, the shopkeeper, spotted our cart from inside and came running out before we'd even stopped. Divine physician, I've been waiting for you every day. Come in. Come in. I gave Huzi 2 taels and told him to find an inn and rest. Too many of my secrets were going to come up today. Better without a witness. Inside the shop, Fat Tao was already looking desperate. He said things had gotten worse, not better. His wife at home did nothing for him. Only at a certain establishment in the city did he feel anything at all. The word he used told me exactly which establishment he meant. I shook the clay bottle slowly. After days of effort, I said, the medicine is finally ready. His eyes locked onto the bottle like it contained the meaning of life itself. That's wonderful, he breathed. I looked at him meaningfully. This took considerable effort to prepare. He understood immediately. He went to the back room and came out carrying a tray with about 100 taels of silver on it. I took the tray and gave him the bottle. Then I told him to take one now so we could go test the results together. He called his assistant to watch the shop, put on his outer robe, and led me into the street. I followed along eagerly. Back in my old world, there were fast food restaurants everywhere, and I still sometimes ate instant noodles out of laziness. Here I had absolutely no such excuse. I couldn't contain it. I threw my head back and yelled at the sky. I'm coming. Fat Tao's hand clamped over my mouth before I finished. He looked genuinely terrified. He said he was a regular man with a wife, and I was supposed to be a renowned spiritual physician, and neither of us should be announcing ourselves. I laughed it off and let him lead the way. We went through several back alleys. At some point, I took a wrong turn and ended up in a narrow lane by accident. Fat Tao stared at me. You've been here before? I had no idea how I'd found it. I told him I didn't know the city and let him take the lead from there. After a few more turns, we stopped in front of a plain 3-story wooden building. Nothing on the outside. No decorations, no noise, no sign. This didn't look like what I'd imagined at all. Fat Tao explained it was the back entrance. Before I could say anything, he knocked. 3 times, pause, 2 more. A specific rhythm. I memorized it immediately. A moment later, the door creaked open. A middle-aged woman in heavy powder and a swaying walk appeared in the doorway. Tao boss, you're early today. Little Hong's still asleep. I stood behind him, trying not to visibly recoil at the sight of her. The inside of the establishment looked nothing like what I'd imagined. Plain, quiet, a little worn down. My expectations dropped considerably. Fat Tao didn't seem to notice or care. He shot straight up the stairs before anyone said another word, calling back that he couldn't wait any longer. Sounds from the 2nd floor followed shortly after. The older woman turned to look at me. She smiled professionally and asked if I had a favorite girl. I told her it was my first visit. She called me a sweet-mouthed young gentleman and patted my chest with her handkerchief, delighted. I stood very still and smiled politely while internally reconsidering several of my life choices. I told her I'd come back in the evening when things were properly open and asked her not to trouble herself over me. She accepted that and swayed back upstairs. I sat downstairs with a cup of tea and waited. Nearly half an hour later, Fat Tao came down looking like a new man. He thanked me enthusiastically, said it had been a transformation, said even the girl had commented favorably, and immediately asked if he could have more medicine. I told him each pill took enormous effort to produce, and what I'd given him was all I had. He accepted this with visible regret. Then he noticed I hadn't gone upstairs at all. I told him that men of spiritual cultivation didn't place much importance on such things. He nodded respectfully, looking deeply impressed. Outside, I asked him about the back entrance and the knock pattern. He explained that the back door was for married men whose wives kept close watch. The rhythm was a code, so the staff knew not to let the wrong people in. That explained everything. I filed the knock pattern away for later use. Over lunch at a good restaurant, Fat Tao talked, and I listened, learning everything I could about how the city worked, who had money, which establishments were worth knowing about. My questions made me seem like someone who'd spent decades in remote mountain hermitage, which only made him trust my spiritual reputation more. That evening I dressed carefully. In a clean white robe, put several small items in my pocket that I'd brought from the convenience store, and walked back to the establishment through the familiar alleys. At the front entrance this time. Properly, through the front door. The older woman spotted me immediately and came forward with both arms out, calling me punctual and charming and saying she'd been thinking about me since I left. I thanked her for her concern and said I'd come to have a proper visit this time. She led me upstairs, away from what she called the ordinary girls on the lower floor, and with a wave of her hand produced 5 or 6 young women of various appearances who arranged themselves around me pleasantly. I asked if there was a top-tier entertainer, a house champion of some kind. The woman looked at me like I'd asked to meet the emperor. The house's featured performers, she explained, were accomplished in music, song, poetry, and classical arts. She asked pointedly what literary talents I possessed. I had no answer for that. She told me that later in the evening, one of these special entertainers would perform on the stage downstairs. If she admired a gentleman's poetry, she might invite him to her room, possibly even without payment. The woman left. I went back inside and drank with the girls around me, only half paying attention because downstairs the curtain on the small stage was being pulled open. A woman with a very good figure walked to the center of the stage with a silk veil across her face. The room below erupted. She performed, sang, and played an instrument. The crowd threw silver coins at the stage like they'd lost their minds. I genuinely couldn't follow the music. The style was completely foreign to me, and I sat there drinking and nodding and waiting for it to end. When it did, the older woman rushed the stage and announced the evening's arrangement. Any gentleman who wished to meet the performer could write a poem. If she liked it, she would invite him in. That was it. A song, a veil, and now everyone writes poetry hoping to get picked? I turned to the girl next to me and asked if that was really how it worked. She said, and called me a charming title she'd apparently never heard before, that if the performer genuinely liked the poem, she might even waive payment entirely. I leaned back in my seat and thought about that for a moment. Poetry, in ancient Chinese style, under time pressure, against probably dozens of educated wealthy men who'd been studying classical verse since childhood. I reached for my cup and started thinking. Write a poem. I was a food delivery guy in my previous life. Poetry was not exactly in my skill set. I told the girl beside me to prepare ink and paper and said I needed to use the outhouse. In the privacy of the bathroom, I slipped into my space, found the books section, located a poetry collection, and read until I found something useful. I memorized the key lines but decided not to copy it exactly. I had no idea if poems from my world existed in this one too. Better to adapt it. What I wrote when I got back was my own version. Something that called the performer not a woman, but a celestial being descended from heaven, and said that if she smiled on me, I'd climb to the highest sky to bring her the whole city. Terrible handwriting. Decent sentiment. I signed my name and handed it over. On the 3rd floor, in a fragrant room, a young woman named Louis was going through the evening's submissions with the expression of someone grading bad exam papers. One man had simply written that he'd pay 800 taels for a conversation. She called him a scoundrel under her breath. Then the last poem arrived. She read it twice, smiled slowly. The writing was ugly, but the words were interesting. She told her maid to bring the one called Chu Chin upstairs. I was in the middle of drinking and laughing with the girls when a prettier girl I hadn't seen before walked in and asked for me by name. I jumped up immediately. She looked me over, then looked at the girls around me, with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then she told me her mistress was inviting me up. I announced to the room that I'd be back another time and followed her to the 3rd floor. The maid knocked, announced me, and left without another word. I had apparently offended her somehow without trying. I knocked and called out in my usual way. A voice from inside told me to enter. The room smelled of something soft and floral. Red bed, red curtains, red everything. It looked like a bridal chamber. At the dressing table, with her back to me, sat a woman with a figure I'd noticed from the stage. She turned around. I forgot how to speak for a moment. The face matched the figure in a way that felt genuinely unfair to every other person alive. She stood and bowed slightly. I am Luai. It is a pleasure, Master Chu. I stuck out my hand automatically. She stared at it. I pulled it back and tried to recover. Old habits from my previous life. Meet an attractive person, immediately malfunction. She led me to a table and poured tea. Said my poem had been creative and unexpected. I told her the truth, that seeing her figure on stage had genuinely affected me, and that now seeing her face as well I was completely lost. She laughed softly and said I was more direct than most of the well-dressed men who came here pretending to be refined gentlemen. I told her I had no use for pretending. I thought she was beautiful. That was the whole story. She asked where I was from and whether I had any scholarly rank. I told her I was from a small village and had no titles whatsoever. She looked puzzled by the way I said, village. Apparently that word didn't quite exist in this era. I told myself to stop using it. Then I got to the point. I asked how much it cost to spend the evening with her. She went quiet. Her expression shifted slightly. That particular look of someone who's heard this 100 times and is tired of it. I felt a little guilty. I changed direction. What would it cost to buy out your contract? I asked. I could use someone capable. You could work as my personal assistant. She didn't know the word, but I explained it. Someone who handles important matters and stays close at hand. She frowned. That sounded like a servant. Then her eyes sharpened with a calculating look. You would pay to free me from this place? If the price makes sense, I said easily. Go ask your madam what the number is. She studied me for a moment. Was this man real? Would he actually spend that kind of money on her? And if he did, what kind of life would that be? She told me her freedom wasn't hers to negotiate. I'd need to speak to the madam myself. Luai wasn't going to invite me to stay that night. Her expression made that clear. I accepted it and went downstairs to find the madam. The way Luai had responded told me she was open to leaving. That meant the conversation was just about money. I found the madam and told her she looked younger every time I saw her. She loved it. I pulled her aside and got straight to the point. How much to buy out Luai's contract? She put on a performance. Talked about raising Luai like a daughter. Said they were like family. Squeezed out a few tears that convinced nobody. I watched and waited. Then she held up 2 fingers. 2,000 taels. I kept my face neutral. That was an absurd number. But I had an idea. I told her I needed a moment and went to find the outhouse. Inside my space, I went to the home goods section and picked up a decorative glass eagle. Wings spread. Beautiful. The kind of thing this world had never seen and couldn't produce. Back in the room, I set it on the table. I paid 3,000 taels for this, I told her. I don't have that much silver on me right now. Take this instead of 2,000. She stopped breathing for a moment. Glass objects in this world were worth more than their weight in gold to the right buyer. Before I finished the sentence, she was already calling for someone to bring the contract. She handed over Luai's papers and clutched the glass eagle like someone had given her a treasure from heaven. All that talk about mother and daughter vanished instantly. I looked at the contract in my hands. In this era, that piece of paper meant a person was legally your property. I found that deeply uncomfortable and deeply convenient at the same time. The madam led me back up to Luai's room. When Luai saw me holding the contract, she understood. This hadn't been an empty offer. Her face went through several things at once. Relief, uncertainty, something between happiness and fear. She was leaving a place she hated, but she knew almost nothing about the man taking her out of it. The madam hugged her and cried dramatically about how much she'd miss her and how she only wanted the best for her daughter. Luai stood still and let herself be hugged. I stood in the doorway trying not to visibly react. At my insistence, we left that same night. I took Luai's hand and headed for the door. A girl with large bags came running after us. The maid, Xiaofang, the same one who'd given me the cold look earlier. She said that since I'd bought out her mistress, she naturally came with her. I looked at the madam. Was this included? The madam waved her hand like it was nothing. I said nothing, grabbed both of them, and walked out as fast as I could without actually running. Terrified the madam might change her mind about the glass eagle once the excitement wore off. At the city's best, and I told the owner I needed a good room, clean and comfortable. Price didn't matter. Luai said one room was enough. Xiaofang was a maid and would attend nearby. I told the owner to do as the lady said, possibly with more enthusiasm than the situation required. The owner looked at me like I was a simple man and handed over the key. The room was large and well appointed by the standards of this era. A big wooden bathing tub was already filled with hot water. I suddenly remembered I was wearing jeans under my robe. Not easy to explain. I told them I'd be right back, found a corner, slipped into my space, changed into proper ancient clothing, and came back. By the time I returned, Loi was already in the bath and Xiaofeng was attending her. I stood in the doorway and tried to remember how to act like a normal person. This feudal era had a great many problems, but it had certain other qualities that I was beginning to appreciate enormously. It was a very long night. The innkeeper downstairs listened to the sounds from upstairs, hit the counter with his fist, told his assistant to watch the desk, and walked directly to the entertainment establishment we'd just come from. I woke up the next morning feeling genuinely excellent about life. Luai and Xiaofeng helped me dress and called for breakfast. Sitting across from both of them at the table, I realized I needed to sort out housing today. I couldn't take them back to Mashan village yet. The timing wasn't right. They needed somewhere proper to stay in the city. After breakfast, I took them both out to properly walk the city for the first time since I'd arrived. Busy streets, vendors calling out prices, women gossiping at stalls. One seller was announcing that genuine mountain ginseng, originally 88 taels, was now 99 copper coins. Another was selling what he called an immortal sword for 3 taels. A third announced that a shopkeeper had run off with his neighbor's wife and both stores were holding a joint clearance sale. I shook my head and smiled. Different world, same people. For a moment, I felt something quiet and far away. A thought about my family back in my old world, whether they were grieving or had moved on. I pushed it aside. I was here now, with a space full of resources and more opportunity than I'd ever had in my previous life. Time to use it well. I took Loi's hand and told her I was going to buy a house in the city to settle them comfortably. Her face fell. She assumed it meant I was hiding her, that a brothel girl wasn't someone you brought home. I explained it wasn't that. I had unfinished business in the village. Once things were handled, I'd come back for them. She accepted this, though I could tell she wasn't fully convinced. Xiaofeng stayed quiet. She understood her position clearly and didn't ask for explanations. I headed toward the city's main property dealer. Before I even reached the door, a young man outside intercepted us with a professional smile. He announced that he knew everything worth knowing in Qingyun City, that he worked independently outside the formal agency, and that he could find us something better than anything they had inside. A voice from inside the building immediately shouted that this person was a street hustler stealing customers. The young man deflated slightly. I called him back. His name was apparently Erguzi, 2-dog, which was unfortunate. But I dealt with enough formal agencies in my previous life to know they charged you for their furniture and decorations as much as anything else. A street-smart local who knew the inventory and worked on commission was probably more useful. Erguzi's eyes lit up when I called him over. I told him I wanted to buy a house and asked what he had. He didn't ask a single question about my requirements. Just looked at me, looked at the 2 women behind me, and said he understood the situation perfectly. He outlined 3 options as we walked. A 3-courtyard home in the West District for 1,200 taels. A 2-courtyard in the same area for 800. A 3-courtyard in the east for 500. But the neighborhood was less desirable. I told him to take me to the West District 3-courtyard first. He nearly jogged ahead of us. The West District was immediately different from the rest of the city. The people here were fine silk. The shops sold gold, quality cloth, good wine. There was also, I noticed, a certain type of establishment I recognized. I looked at it with what I thought was a neutral expression. Luai gave me a pained look. I decided this was definitely the right neighborhood. Erguzi brought us to a large courtyard property with a proper garden, a pond, a decorative rock feature, and more than 10 rooms of various sizes. The whole place was well-maintained and spacious. I counted the rooms mentally and thought that I could fit quite a few people here comfortably. The number 1,200 taels was going to need some negotiation, though. I told Erguzi the house was good, but the price needed discussion. He said that was between me and the owner. His job was just to make the introduction. I asked him to bring the owner. Less than half an hour later, a heavy-set man in expensive silk robes walked through the gate. The heavy-set man walked in and asked loudly if I was the one interested in buying his property. I asked him why he was selling. He seemed surprised I didn't recognize him. Erguzi jumped in to explain. This was Master Zhou, the largest salt merchant in Qingyun City, heading to the capital to expand his business. Salt merchant. In this era, salt wasn't something anyone could just sell. The trade was controlled by powerful families and government licenses. This man was seriously wealthy and seriously connected. I laid on the flattery, told him his reputation preceded him, that meeting him was an honor, that my admiration flowed like an endless river. Every word of it shameless and deliberate. He loved it. His whole posture relaxed. He knocked 100 taels off the price immediately. 1,100, take it or leave it. I said done, but my mind was already somewhere else entirely. My space contained enormous quantities of salt from the supermarket and convenience store stockrooms, more than I could use in several lifetimes. And somewhere in the book section, there were almost certainly technical references on salt production and purification. The salt sold in this world was crude and bitter. Everyone knew it, but nobody could fix it. The refining technology simply didn't exist here. Pure white salt with no bitterness would be worth an absolute fortune, and the man standing in front of me was perfectly positioned to sell it. I told him I needed to use the outhouse for a moment. He watched me go with a puzzled expression, probably wondering if I was about to disappear without paying. I came back with a small cloth pouch. I pulled Master Zhou aside quietly, away from Loi and Xiaofeng. "Let me show you something interesting," I said, and handed him the bag. He opened it expecting a trick. Inside was fine white powder. He almost said something dismissive, then stopped, dipped his finger in, put it to his tongue. Pure salt. No bitterness at all. His face changed completely. A man who'd spent his life in the salt trade knew exactly what he was looking at. This wasn't just good salt. This was something that didn't exist in the Great Xia dynasty. Whoever controlled this could transform their family's fortune entirely. He straightened up and said he'd like to be my friend. Then, because he was a merchant and merchants test people, he added carefully that producing something like this would require powerful protection to keep it safe. I heard the implied threat clearly. "Let me show you one more thing," I said. I palmed my handgun inside my wide sleeve so he couldn't see it. Pointed toward the courtyard wall. 8 shots. 8 holes punched clean through solid brick, daylight showing through each one. Master Zhou sat down hard on the ground. When he got back up, he was a different man. He knelt, called me an immortal descended from heaven, and apologized for his earlier implication. I helped him up and told him to relax. I just wanted a business arrangement, not reverence. And could he please go back to acting like a normal person? He understood immediately. I didn't want my abilities announced publicly. He composed himself and said the house was mine, no charge needed. I refused the gift. Accepting it meant owing him something. I told him one thing had nothing to do with the other and insisted on paying. He dropped the price to 200 taels. I tried to add more. He wouldn't take it. By midday, with Erguzi running back and forth handling paperwork, the property was officially transferred to my name. I gave Erguzi 20 taels. He left looking like he'd won something. That afternoon, Master Zhou took us to the best private dining room in the city's finest restaurant. He poured wine and kept pouring it, in excellent spirits. I put both Luai and Xiaofeng at the table with us. This wasn't how things were done in this era. Women didn't eat at the same table as men. I didn't care. Drinking without women present seemed like a waste of a perfectly good meal. Over food, Master Zhou asked, carefully using no specific words, when the goods might be available. I leaned over and told him quietly, 3 months from now, Masan Village, Qingyou Town. Come find me. He smiled the smile of a man who had just seen his future get considerably brighter. The 4 of us ate and drank until the afternoon light was going golden through the windows, and for the first time since I'd crossed over, things felt genuinely settled. We drank until curfew and stumbled back to the inn. The next morning my head reminded me that low-alcohol ancient wine still had consequences. I lay there for a moment taking inventory of my finances. After paying Master Zhou for the house, I was running low. Time to earn more. I got up quietly, leaving Loi and Xiaofeng still sleeping, pulled a glass figurine from my space. A horse in full gallop, one hoof landing on a flying swallow, wrapped it in rough cloth, and walked out into the city. The first pawn shop I'd used was out of the question. Too awkward after what happened. I was in the West District now anyway, wealthy neighborhood, reputable businesses, lower chance of anyone trying to rob me on the way home. I walked into a grand-looking establishment called Gold Prosperity. The moment the clerk saw my clothes, he came forward immediately. Amazing what a decent robe does for your reception. I told him I had something to sell and asked to see the owner directly. That signaled money. He disappeared into the back and returned with a lean, elderly man named Zhu Fu. After brief introductions, Zhu Fu explained he wasn't technically the owner. Gold Prosperity was a merchant group operating across the entire Great Xia dynasty. But in Qingyun City, his word was final. Good enough. I unwrapped one corner of the cloth just enough for him to see a glint of glass. His eye twitched. Then he very calmly suggested we continue this conversation in the back room. I followed without hesitation. I was wearing body armor, had a handgun tucked in my robe, and a combat knife on my belt. A well-dressed elderly businessman didn't concern me. The back room had tea already prepared and several attendants waiting. I sat down across from Zhu Fu and unwrapped the figurine completely. The room went quiet. The glass horse was exquisite even by my standards. Perfectly clear, no bubbles or imperfections. The horse frozen mid-leap, with one hoof pressing down on a tiny swallow in flight. Every person in the room stared at it. The attendants whispered to each other. Zhu Fu composed his face carefully, but I could see the excitement underneath. He asked about its origins, framing it politely, but clearly checking whether I'd stolen it from someone important. I understood what he was doing. I told him he was a man of experience and asked if he'd ever seen anything like it. He hadn't. He asked what it was called. I told him, a horse treading on a flying swallow. A horse so fast it could step on a bird in flight. He called it exquisite. Then he began the careful dance of lowering the price before naming it, talking about transport risks, the distance to the capital where it could actually be sold, the costs involved. He offered 25,000 taels. Internally, I nearly fell off my chair. This thing was worth 25,000 taels. Externally, I said nothing and began wrapping it back up. He went to 26,000. 310,000, I said. Not one coin less. I'll drop it on the floor before I take less. He looked pained. I stood up to leave. 310,000 then, he called after me. And you come to me first with anything else you have. Before anyone else, I turned around and looked at him. He was performing the expression of a man who had just lost money, but I knew better. Taken to the capital as a gift for the right person, that figurine was worth influence that money couldn't measure. He'd done well. Since you mention it, I said, and pulled the combat knife from my belt and set it on the table between us. You have a good eye? What do you make of this material? Zhu Fu grabbed the knife immediately, turned it over, tested the edge, and called it a divine weapon. Asked if I was selling. I told him items like this were common where I came from and left it at that. Not selling today. I'd only brought the one, and walking around the city with 30,000 taels worth of silver notes already made me nervous enough without advertising more. He didn't push, but he became very curious about where I lived. A place that produced glass figurines and steel like this. He was already imagining it as some kind of a mortal's mountain retreat. I told him I was from a small village and asked him to stop stalling and pay me. He laughed and did. I left Gold Prosperity with a stack of silver notes and a small metal token. Zhu Fu explained the token was a VIP membership, valid at any Gold Prosperity branch across the entire Great Xia dynasty. Ancient people had already invented loyalty programs. I tucked it into the inside pocket of my down jacket under the robe and headed back to the inn. Luai and Xiaofang had already eaten breakfast and saved me a portion, steamed buns and millet porridge, still warm. I sat down and felt genuinely content. This was the right way to live. After eating, I handed Luai 100 taels silver note and told her to furnish the new house, move in, hire a couple of maids, and get settled. I had to leave the city today. Her expression went quiet. I could see what she was thinking. 2 days, 1 night, a house, some money, and now he's leaving. Was that all this was? She pushed the silver note back. Said she had savings from her years at the establishment. Told me just coming to visit occasionally would be enough. That surprised me more than I expected. I didn't say much. I put the money away, walked them to the new house, and headed to find Huzi. He was sitting on the mule cart outside Fat Tao's clothing shop, watching the street with the expression of someone who had been waiting for a very long time. Fat Tao had apparently been inviting him inside for 2 hours. Huzi had refused to move. When he saw me coming, he jumped off the cart. Fat Tao came out too and explained the situation. I introduced Huzi as my cousin, not a driver. Then I understood why Huzi hadn't gone in. He was embarrassed by his rough cloth clothes in a shop full of fine fabric. I asked Fat Tao to fit him out properly. Huzi turned red and twisted around uncomfortably as they measured him. When he came out in new silk robes, he looked like a completely different person, taller somehow, more composed. He immediately asked Fat Tao how much it cost. Fat Tao said nothing, not for the divine physician's cousin. I handed over 10 taels anyway, and pulled Huzi out before either of them could argue. On the cart, Huzi muttered that I'd just spent 10 taels on clothes for him. I told him to stop thinking about it and drive. Where to? We need to find a master builder, I said. I want to start on the house. Huzi had apparently spent the last 2 days doing exactly the research I needed without being asked. He'd located a craftsman outside the city, a man named Chong Wei, whose family had built houses for generations. The city governor's mansion was his work. Nobody in Qingyun City built better, and nobody could usually afford to hire him. Less than half an hour later, we stopped in front of a solid brick house at the edge of the city. I grabbed a large cut of lamb and a sack of rice from my space and handed them to Huzi to carry. Then I knocked on the door. Is Master Chong home? A young boy opened the door, looked at us, and said flatly that his father wasn't home. I smiled and asked when his father would be back. He went inside, came back, and said his father didn't know. I handed him a folded piece of paper and a single tael of silver and told him to show his father the paper. The silver got his attention. He took both and disappeared. A moment later, the door opened again, noticeably wider, and the boy's whole manner had changed. My father is home after all. Please come in. I gave him a lollipop from my pocket as I passed. He stared at it, confused. I popped it into his mouth for him. His eyes went wide. Sweetest thing he'd ever tasted in his life, judging by the sounds he made. Inside the main room, a man around 50 years old was sitting completely still, holding my paper in both hands, staring at it without blinking. He didn't look up when I greeted him. Finally, he asked where I'd gotten the drawing. I told him I'd drawn it myself. He turned and looked at me properly for the first time. Couldn't believe it. What I'd given him was a floor plan, something I'd sketched from memory using a pencil and ruler on a large sheet of paper from my space, based on modern home designs I'd seen in books. A 2.5-story structure, brick and tile, with wooden framing between floors. I'd included an indoor bathroom with plumbing since I'd found a hardware store in my space with pipes and fixtures. No cement. This world didn't have it, but the bones of the design were solid. Master Chong decided I must be a disciple of some legendary architectural master who preferred to remain unknown. I confirmed this without hesitation. He apologized for initially refusing to see me. I asked him to build the house based on the plans. Told him I needed it in Mashan Village, Qingyou Town. He thought it was unusual to build something this fine in a rural village, but didn't say so out loud. He studied the drawing carefully and agreed to take the job. Then he asked about one specific detail. Why was the outhouse inside the house? I explained that my master had crafted special toilet fixtures and water pipes that eliminated any odor entirely. He looked at me like I'd described magic. He was already planning the trip to the village just to see it. I told him to prepare a full cost estimate, and I'd come back tomorrow. He could manage everything. Materials, labor, the whole project. I'd just pay. He nodded, satisfied with the arrangement, and went straight back to studying the plans. Huzi left the lamb and rice with the boy at the door, then tucked a handful of lollipops into the boy's hand on the way out. The kid's entire attitude toward us transformed instantly. I commented that children were simple. Give them something sweet, and they'd think you were wonderful. Huzi scratched his head and drove us back into the city. In front of a good restaurant in the West District, I asked Huzi what he wanted to eat. He answered immediately, meat buns. 20 of them. I shook my head but said nothing and led him inside. I ordered a full table of proper dishes and a large bowl of rice, plus 10 meat buns because Huzi asked twice. I ate slowly and tasted everything. Huzi ate like someone who hadn't seen food in a week. Face shining with grease, completely absorbed, the rest of the world entirely irrelevant. Watching him, I thought about my delivery days back in my old life. The rare times I'd scraped together enough for a proper restaurant meal. I hadn't been much different. No elegance, no restraint. Just the uncomplicated joy of finally eating something real. Ordinary life didn't leave much room for refinement. I picked up my chopsticks and stopped thinking about it. The next morning, I went back to Master Chang's house as agreed. His son opened the door before I'd finished knocking, completely different from yesterday's reception. Lollipops do a lot of work. Master Chong had the estimate ready. 600 taels for the whole build. He'd go to the village tomorrow with his son to assess the land, then bring his crew and start work the day after. 600 taels. Essentially a glass cup traded for a house. I agreed without hesitation, handed over 100 taels as a deposit, and left. Huzi and I did some shopping in the West Market, loaded up the cart, and headed back toward Masan village. We arrived around midday. Everything seemed normal on the road. But back in the village, something was wrong. At that moment, two constables were sitting in the village chief's front room like they owned it. Wang Defa stood below them, looking deeply unhappy. They'd come about a murder investigation. Several men found dead in the hills. Ma Sen among them. Wang Defa privately thought, good riddance, the man had cuckolded him, but outwardly he looked worried. The constables told him to take them to my house. Qing Lian opened the door, saw the armed constables, and kept her face calm. She told them I was in the city and hadn't returned, asked if they'd like to wait, and offered to make food. The younger constable agreed immediately. While she cooked, she slipped next door to my uncle's house and told him to find me and warn me not to come home. My uncle headed for the village entrance and ran straight into our cart coming the other way. He told me everything in one breath. Constables. Murder investigation. They were at the house right now. I sat with it for a moment. The pawn shop ambush. Rain would have handled the evidence. The gambling house crew. I had an alibi for that day. I'd planned it specifically. This felt like it was coming from the gambling house side, not the pawn shop. But either way, I needed to face it directly. Running would only confirm guilt. Drive home, I told Huzi. My uncle nearly had a heart attack. I told him we hadn't broken any laws and asked what exactly he was afraid of. He looked at me, read my expression, and understood. I had this handled. We pulled up to find Wang Defa standing outside, waving his arms, trying to signal me away. I ignored him and walked straight to the two constables. Gentlemen, I hear you're looking for me. The lead constable asked if I was Chu Chun. I confirmed it without any nervousness. He introduced himself as Constable Nyoair from Qingnyo Town, then asked where I'd been on the 8th day of the month. I put on my best confused expression, said I was a law-abiding citizen of 20-some years, and wondered if perhaps they'd come to give me an award. Nyoair studied my face, then told me directly, Ma San and several men from Sanha gambling house had been found dead in the hills. Did I know anything about it? The 8th, I said. I was hunting on the back hill that morning. Caught a wild boar. The whole village was here eating it by midday. Wang Defa confirmed it immediately. The whole village had been together that entire day. Nobody had left. Nyoair went quiet. He looked at the younger constable beside him, then at Qing Lian in the kitchen doorway. Something shifted in his expression. The younger constable, I realized, was the gambling house owner's brother-in-law. This wasn't official justice. It was a revenge visit dressed up as an investigation. Nyoair looked like a man regretting his life choices. He'd been dragged into someone else's grudge and now had no evidence. A solid alibi confirmed by the village chief himself, and a suspect who didn't look remotely like someone capable of killing 5 men with unknown weapons in the middle of a forest. The younger constable, 8 Jean, the gambling house owner's brother-in-law, didn't care about alibis or evidence. He told Constable Nyoair to stop stalling and make the arrest. Nyoair hesitated. He knew this was wrong. But 8 Jean reminded him quietly who his brother-in-law was, and what that meant for Nyoair's career. Nyoair's face went flat. He apologized to me and put his hands on my arms. I didn't resist. Qing Lian started to protest. She knew what happened to people in custody when powerful men wanted them silenced. I told her to stay home and wait. I hadn't done anything wrong, and I wasn't afraid. 8 Jean took one long look at Qing Lian on his way out that I didn't like at all. My uncle nearly wore a hole in the ground pacing after we left. Then he grabbed Huzi and Wang Defa and drove the mule cart toward Qingnyo Town to be available as witnesses if needed. We'd barely reached the edge of Qingnyo Town when 2 fine carriages came toward us on the road. 8 Jean scrambled to get out of the way. Expensive horses and elaborate carriages meant important people, and important people in Qingnyo Town made men like him nervous. The carriages stopped directly in front of us. A heavy-set man stepped out. Master Zhou, the salt merchant I'd sold the house to just days ago. Chu Chun, he called out warmly. Where are you headed? And why the constables? 8 Jean recovered himself and stepped forward. This man is a murder suspect. We're taking him in for questioning. Master Zhou ignored him completely and asked me if I'd actually killed someone. I smiled and spread my hands. Do I look like someone who could kill anyone? Master Zhou laughed. Don't be modest. Killing someone is nothing for a man like you. 8 Jin's expression shifted. He asked Master Zhou to identify himself before interfering with official business. Master Zhou glanced at him and said 2 words to someone behind him. One of his attendants stepped forward and slapped 8 Jin across the face. Twice, hard enough to leave him stumbling. 8 Jin grabbed his cheek, furious. He yelled that attacking a constable in Qingyou town was a serious mistake and that he didn't care who they were. They'd answer for this. He shouted at Niu Air to go back and get reinforcements. Niu Air, who had never liked 8 Jin to begin with, stood completely still. Master Zhou just looked amused. Then a young man stepped out of the second carriage and asked what the delay was. Master Zhou turned respectfully and introduced us. This was his young master, Zhou Hong. I stepped forward and greeted him properly. He was about my age, but carried himself with the kind of effortless authority that came from never once having to explain himself to anyone. Not flashy like a merchant's son. Something quieter and more solid than that. Master Zhou explained that he'd shown Zhou Hong the glass figurine, and the young master had insisted on coming immediately to meet me. I kept my expression neutral. We'd agreed on 3 months. Showing up this fast with someone this important in tow, the salt business had clearly moved faster than I planned. I told them I wasn't prepared, and they'd likely be going home empty-handed. Zhou Hong said that was fine. He just wanted to meet me. He asked me to lead the way. We were all moving toward the carriages when a loud shout came from down the road. Nobody moves. You think you can assault a constable in my town and just walk away? Zhou Hong turned at the shout. 8 Jin was coming down the road with 7 or 8 men behind him and a heavy-set middle-aged man in constable's uniform, the head constable of Qingyou town, leading the group, long sword in hand. The head constable had clearly never seen anyone important come through this town before. He swaggered forward like he owned the road. Master Zhou's guards drew their blades. Harm the young master and you die where you stand, the guard captain said flatly. The head constable laughed. Who do you think you are, the emperor? Master Zhou smiled from behind the group. Take one more step and see what happens. 8 Jin, still furious about being slapped, decided having the head constable behind him made him invincible. He charged forward with his sword. One of the guards cut his head off. It took about 3 breaths. When it was over, 8 Jin and the head constable and every man they'd brought lay on the ground. Done. Zhou Hong walked over to Constable Niu Air, who was standing completely still with the expression of a man whose mind had stopped working. You weren't part of this, Zhou Hong said. It wasn't a question. Niu Air couldn't form words. Zhou Hong didn't push him. He said something quietly to one of his guards, who left immediately on some errand. Then he turned back to me. Shall we go, Brother Chu? He got back in the carriage like nothing had happened. I climbed into Master Zhou's carriage, sat down, and quietly reconsidered who exactly I had made friends with. Killing constables in open daylight in a town they'd probably never visited before, without hesitation or concern. Zhou Hong's background was something far beyond a wealthy merchant family. Master Zhou chatted pleasantly the whole way to the village. When we arrived, Qinglian saw me walk through the gate unharmed, and her eyes filled with tears immediately. I introduced Master Zhou and Zhou Hong and didn't explain how I'd gotten free so quickly. She didn't ask. Master Zhou looked at our shack and then at Qinglian and said something appreciative about the gap between the house and its occupant. Zhou Hong smiled politely and said nothing, though I caught him looking at the crumbling walls with a slight frown. I apologized for the state of things and asked Qinglian to bring out some stools. She gave me a look that said clearly, "What stools?" I said I'd get some from inside. Once in the room, I ducked into my space and came out carrying a stack of plastic chairs from the supermarket, the kind used at outdoor food stalls, nested inside each other. Everyone stared at them. Master Zhou sat down and commented that the material was remarkable, didn't wobble at all under his considerable weight. I said they were called plastic and a Western friend had given them to me, and I didn't know much more than that. Then I went to the kitchen before anyone could ask further questions. These people had traveled a long way and probably hadn't eaten. I might not be a professional chef, but I knew how to make a decent hot pot. I brought out lamb, beef, various meatballs, vegetables, a package of hot pot broth base, and 2 bottles of 40 proof baijiu in glass bottles, which Master Zhou immediately grabbed out of my hands before I opened them, fascinated by the glass. I set up a fire outside, got the pot going, poured in the broth base. The smell hit everyone at once. Heads turned. In a world where most cooking was boiling or steaming, the rich, spiced aroma of hot pot broth was completely unlike anything they'd encountered. I told them the new house wasn't built yet, so this was the best I could offer. Rough and simple. Zhou looked at the unfamiliar ingredients and the strange disposable chopsticks with an curious expression. Master Zhou leaned over and said something in his ear. Zhou nodded, looking like things made sense now. The guards arranged themselves around the perimeter and stayed standing. I invited them to sit and eat. They smiled and didn't move. Feudal hierarchy. Right. I went back to the kitchen and set up an identical spread at a second fire for the guards. Qinglian quietly headed to my aunt's house to give us space. The three of us settled around the pot. Early winter, fire going, warmth spreading out into the cold air. I dumped the ingredients in and handed the guards table the same. Then I reached for the baijiu. Master Zhou got there first. He turned the glass bottle over in his hands. The bottle itself is glass, he said, almost to himself. I'd forgotten about that. I told him this was a special vintage not available to ordinary people, and that his visit was the only reason I was opening it at all. I passed a bottle to the guard's table with instructions on how to open it. A moment later, the smell of strong spirits drifted across both tables, and everyone's expression changed at once. Master Zhou picked up a meatball and asked what this style of cooking was called. I told him it was called hot pot, everything cooked together in a shared pot of spiced broth. Good for winter. He decided this was further proof that my village was some kind of immortal realm beyond ordinary human understanding. A minute later, I tasted the broth and said it needed salt. I went to the kitchen, came back with a clay jar, and shook some in. Zhou hand shot out and grabbed the jar before I could set it down. He stared at the white powder inside. Then he looked up at me with an expression that said his uncle hadn't been exaggerating. This is real, he said. You can actually produce this in quantity? What's the cost? We'd arrived at the real topic. I told him I couldn't produce large amounts yet, but in 3 months I'd be ready, and the cost was lower than he could imagine. He put the jar down carefully and told me something I hadn't known. The salt trade in the Great Xia dynasty had been controlled by the same powerful families for over 100 years. The common people suffered for it. The crude, bitter salt available to ordinary people was nearly unaffordable, and the better grades were priced even higher and still inferior to what I'd shown him. Breaking that control was something he'd been trying to do for a long time. He offered me a 50-50 split on all revenue. I didn't answer immediately. I was doing my own calculations. Salt in this city sold for 50 copper coins per liang, and that was for yellow, low-quality crude salt that most families could barely afford. Premium salt went for 500 coins per liang and was still nothing like mine in purity. Whoever controlled this could reshape entire economies. But I needed time. A facility, workers, a proper operation. The village was the right base, but nothing was built yet. I told him 3 months, same as before. Come back then, and I'd have something real to show him. He accepted this gracefully. Said he'd been too eager, and that something this significant couldn't be agreed to over one meal. He was right, and I appreciated that he understood it. Then I raised a cup and thanked them both. Without their intervention today, I'd still be sitting in a cell while someone figured out how to make the charges stick. Everyone drank. The baijiu hit the guard's table like a revelation. 40 proof spirits in a world where wine was thin and barely alcoholic. They looked like men who had just discovered something important about the universe. There's not enough, one of the guards called out. I went back to the kitchen and brought out 2 more bottles. Midway through the meal, a guard arrived on horseback and spoke quietly into Zhou ear. Zhou turned to me. The matter is resolved, he said. Qingyou town won't give you trouble again. Sana gambling house has been shut down. I nearly asked the obvious question and then stopped myself. Thank you, Brother Zhou, I said instead. You're clearly more than a salt merchant, he smiled. Nothing gets past you. But that's a conversation for after we're in business together. He raised his cup. We drank. The meal ran for a full hour before they left. On his way out, Zhou mentioned he'd be staying in Qingyun City for the 3 months, and I could come to him with any problems. I gave them a large clay jar of salt and 4 bottles of baijiu for the road. Felt like a fair exchange for a rescued afternoon. After they were gone, I stood holding one of the remaining bottles and thought about something. The glass objects could earn big money at first, but eventually the market would fill and the prices would drop. My space had enormous supplies, but not infinite ones. Salt was better, essential, renewable if I could establish production, and the demand would never go away. But liquor might be even better. The space had plenty of raw materials. And a world that had just tasted 40 proof baijiu for the first time was a world with a very large, unmet need. I set the bottle down and started thinking. Early the next morning, Master Chong arrived at my door with his son Lai Fu. I asked if they'd eaten. It was nearly mid-morning. Master Chong gave me the look of a man who has been awake and working since before dawn. He said they were here to assess the land. Building a proper house wasn't something to rush. I had to work hard not to laugh at his son's name. Chong Wei, Chong Lai Fu. In my old world, that name combination would have meant something very unfortunate. I kept my face neutral and led them to the open ground beside our shack. Master Chong walked the perimeter with Lai Fu, nodding and shaking his head at intervals in a way that made my stomach tighten. Finally, he came back and said the location had excellent feng shui and geography, then paused for dramatic effect, then said there was one problem. I asked him to just say it. Water. The ground here wasn't suitable for digging a well. In his years of experience, this site would never yield reliable water. I relaxed. I'd already solved this. I brought them around to the back of the house where I'd stacked pipes, fittings, connectors, and various plumbing components from the hardware store in my space. Master Chong picked up a pipe and turned it over, genuinely puzzled by the material. I told him I didn't fully understand it either, but that it worked perfectly. My plan was to run the piping from the mountain stream above the village down to the house. Clean running water, no well needed. The next half hour was an education for both of them. I walked them through pipes, elbow joints, traps, a toilet, a squat fixture, a shower head. I used a soldering iron heated over a flame to join two pipe sections together, and Master Chong called it miraculous. By the end, he said he and his son had learned more that morning than in years of work. He kept saying he'd never imagined a mind clever enough to design all of this. I thought about the solar panels on the rooftops in my space and decided not to mention electricity just yet. One thing at a time. At noon, I made hot pot again. This time, I insisted Qinglian sit at the table with us. Master Chong looked briefly startled. Women didn't share tables with men in this era. I said my wife was there to be enjoyed, not to serve, and that was reason enough. Qinglian turned red and looked like she was reconsidering several things about our arrangement. The afternoon got away from everyone because the baijiu was strong and Master Chong and Lai Fu weren't prepared for it. I sent them home cheerful and slightly unsteady. Then I called Huzi over, gave him 20 taels, and asked him to go into town for supplies. I told him construction was starting tomorrow and asked him to bring my uncle and aunt along to help with cooking and running errands. I'd pay wages for it. He agreed without questions and drove off at his usual alarming speed. After that, I picked up a few items and walked to the village chief's house. I'd spent the previous night deep in my space's book section looking for something specific. I'd found it, a detailed method for refining mineral rock salt. I'd also located equipment I could adapt for the process. Now I needed to know if the raw material was nearby. Wang Defa opened the door, looking very cheerful. A woman in her 30s was sitting in the main room behind him. He'd clearly moved on from the previous situation with remarkable efficiency. I congratulated him first, presented my gift, smiled at the woman, and then got to the point. I asked if there was any rock salt in the area around Mashan village. He said rock salt was poisonous and not suitable for eating. The fact that he answered immediately told me he knew where it was. The poison issue was just mineral impurities, easily removed with the right process. I told him I had a use for it and asked where it was. He said the barren hill to the west of the village, right next to my land, was essentially made of the stuff. That's why nothing would grow there. I asked if I could buy that hill. He warned me it was useless land. Nothing would grow on it. I should think carefully. I was already thinking. I'd just bought land sitting on top of a salt deposit and didn't know it. The original Chu Chen really had been spectacularly bad at everything except losing money. After some back and forth, I bought the whole barren hill for 100 taels. Wang Defa couldn't sell it fast enough. Useless land that couldn't grow anything, and someone wanted to pay for it. He took the 100 taels plus a 10-tael handling fee and headed straight to town to file the paperwork, telling me over his shoulder he'd have everything sorted by end of day. I went up the hill with a folding shovel from my space and started digging. Less than a meter down, I hit it. Yellowish-white crystals catching the light. Rock salt. Right here. On land I already owned. next to the house I was already building. I may have shouted. I'd been mentally planning a trip to the coast to collect seawater for salt production. The answer had been in my backyard the whole time. The original Chu-chun had truly been gifted at overlooking valuable things. I came back down and found my uncle. I told him I wanted to build a workshop at the base of the western hill and asked him to find some local craftsmen. He looked at me the way he always did when he thought I was about to waste money. Asked why I couldn't just live comfortably on what I had. I told him I'd made a promise to an important person and needed to follow through. Mentioning the important person ended the discussion. He said he'd handle it. I went home, spent half an hour drawing a rough floor plan for the workshop, put 100 taels in a bag, and handed both to my uncle. Told him he was in charge of the build, and I just wanted the finished result. He tried to hand some of the money back. I told him to use what he needed and hold the rest. He left without further argument. By evening I had housing arranged, a workshop arranged, a salt deposit secured, and construction starting tomorrow. Time to rest for a while. At dinner I asked Qinglian if she could read. She gave me a puzzled look. Of course her husband would know something like that about her. I covered by saying the gambling house beating had knocked some memories loose. She accepted this sympathetically and told me she'd never had any schooling. She was a farm girl. Reading wasn't something her family had. That created a problem. I'd found a cookbook in my space, 100 everyday recipes with full-color photographs, and had been planning to give it to her so she could expand her cooking. But if she couldn't read, it was useless. I pulled the book out and told her it was a culinary guide I'd come across, full of techniques that would make her an extraordinary cook. She took it, and her eyes went wide. The photographs alone, vivid color images of dishes she'd never seen, were unlike anything that existed in this world. She turned pages slowly, genuinely amazed. She agreed to learn to read. Immediately, said she wanted to be able to make every single thing in that book. That night we sat on the bed, and I started teaching her characters by lamplight. We stayed up much later than planned. The next morning Master Chang arrived before we were up, bringing a full crew of workers. Tents went up on the open ground. Ox carts came in from the road carrying stone and timber. The village filled with noise and activity. I opened the door to the sound of hammering and the smell of fresh-cut wood, and felt genuinely content. I handed Master Chang 500 taels. I'd only given him 100 deposit and had completely forgotten the rest, and introduced him to my uncle and Huzi as the people to contact when I wasn't around. Then I let the professionals work and went inside for breakfast. Watching Qinglian move quietly around the kitchen, I suddenly thought of something I'd been ignoring. I asked if we'd been to visit her parents recently. She went still. The truth was the original Chu-chun had never known where her family lived. Had never asked. Had never cared enough to find out. I was essentially asking about strangers whose daughter I was currently married to. Qinglian looked at me with wide eyes, then immediately teared up. I told her it was just a visit to her family and asked why she was crying. She said she was happy, that she hadn't expected me to think of her parents. I covered my ignorance as gracefully as I could, said the beating had knocked some memories loose, and asked her to remind me about her family's situation. She didn't find this strange. She told me quietly. Her family lived in Longyan village near Qingyo town. Her father was a heavy drinker who had never valued her. She'd been unwanted from birth, and so had her mother, who had spent decades absorbing his anger after he'd been drinking. Her older brother had married and wanted to build a new room onto the house, so her father had sold her to the original Chu-chun scholar father for 2 silver taels. The condition was no returns. The money was spent and wouldn't be refunded regardless. She said she felt nothing for her father. Her only real concern was her mother. She asked if she could use some of the 100 taels I'd given her to buy her mother clothes and bedding. I thought about it differently. Gifts wouldn't fix that situation. If things were as bad as she described, the real solution was getting her mother out of there. Something to consider once the house was built. For now I told her not to worry about the money and to get dressed in her best clothes. We were leaving immediately. She looked surprised. The house construction had just started. Shouldn't someone stay and watch? I told her the professionals didn't need watching. I asked her to get ready. She asked what I meant when I said we were going to show off. I told her to just get dressed and think about seeing her mother. We drove to Qingyo town first. At the lamb stall, I told the vendor I'd take everything on the table. He stared, then started weighing and loading without another word. 8 taels of silver for the lot. Qinglian watched with her mouth slightly open. 8 taels was a farm family's entire annual budget. I told her this was intentional. I wanted her father to regret how he'd treated her. She should trust me. I went to the wine shop next and bought 2 large jars, then poured in 8 bottles of 52 proof baijiu from my space and topped everything off with the local wine. I wasn't planning to drink any of that myself. At the clothing shop, I told Qinglian to pick out several outfits for her mother. Nobody else in the family was getting anything. Then rice, oil, salt, soy sauce, loaded everything onto the cart, and drove toward Longyan village. At the village entrance, a group of women sitting in the shade spotted us immediately. Isn't that Li Lauer's daughter, Qinglian? She came back in a mule cart. I heard her father sold her for 2 taels to some wastrel in Mashan village. Do you think she's been returned? A small crowd quietly followed us toward her family's house. Inside, Qinglian's mother was cooking a few grains of millet in a large pot of boiled wild greens. The sister-in-law was lying in the new room. Her father, Li Lauer, was dozing in the main hall, the new room next to the original thatched shack. That was probably what the 2 taels had built. When the cart rolled up, Li Lauer jumped to his feet. His daughter-in-law came out of the bedroom. A mule cart arriving at a house this poor was an event worth waking up for. Then he saw Qinglian and me, and his first words were, "You little waste of money. Did they send you back?" "I told your father-in-law the 2 taels aren't being refunded." His daughter-in-law joined in immediately. Said the money was already in the walls of the new room and couldn't be returned regardless. I looked at Qinglian. She'd gone completely still. No tears, no anger. Just the blankness of someone who had heard this kind of welcome so many times it no longer landed. She walked straight to the kitchen to find her mother. I stepped forward and told Li Lauer calmly that nobody was talking about refunds. He blinked, looked at me properly for the first time. His daughter-in-law spotted the loaded cart over my shoulder, and her entire manner changed within one breath. "Father," she said quickly, "our brother-in-law has come to visit. Come inside. Come inside." She was already steering the old man toward the door and gesturing for me to follow. Li Lauer caught up fast. His voice warmed by several degrees. Of course, son-in-law. Please come in. I was just saying what a capable girl Qinglian is." I walked into the main hall without responding to either of them and sat down. In the kitchen, Qinglian found her mother and called out to her. I heard the reunion from where I sat. Her mother immediately checking whether I'd hit her. Qinglian saying I treated her well and had insisted on coming. Her mother wanting to see this husband for herself. When they came out, I stood and bowed properly. "I am Chu Chun. I'm glad to finally meet you, mother-in-law." The woman froze. She was thin in a way that spoke of years of hard work and not enough food, and looked older than she should have for Qinglian's age. One look at Li Lauer, sitting lazily in his chair, told me everything about why. I changed the subject quickly and told Qinglian we should unload before the meat went off. The word meat reached Li Lauer's ears, and he straightened up immediately. I made sure to announce things loudly enough for the neighbors gathering outside the wall to hear. "Mother-in-law, this rice and lamb is for you. You need to eat more." She protested that it was too much, that we should keep it for ourselves. She counted the lamb. Must have been 100 pounds, and looked like someone who'd never seen that much meat in one place. Then I called out to Li Lauer, told him there was wine on the cart, something brought from the western regions, too heavy for me to carry alone. He was off his chair before I finished the sentence. The cart took a long time to unload. Rice, lamb, 2 enormous jars of enhanced wine, oil, soy sauce, fabric, new clothes. The pile in the courtyard kept growing, and the crowd outside the wall kept getting louder. Li Lauer transformed completely. He went from calling Qinglian a money-wasting nuisance to calling me his excellent and beloved son-in-law about every 30 seconds, making sure the neighbors heard each time. Outside, people were saying that the wastrel had no sense, giving all this to a man who'd treated Qinglian the way Li Lauer had. Others were asking if I took concubines and mentioning their daughters. I didn't hear any of it. I was sitting in the main hall, letting Li Lauer talk warmly at me. He said I should come more often. I told him that was really up to Qinglian. Qinglian came back with her mother, both of them now in the new clothes. Her sister-in-law stared at the mother-in-law's outfit and immediately started talking about how filial Qinglian was, her meaning completely transparent. Qinglian smiled and said, "Of course, mother worked so hard. She deserved nice things." That closed the topic entirely. Her sister-in-law went to the kitchen to cook, which was apparently unprecedented. I lit a cigarette. Li Lauer stared. Everyone stared. I told them a friend from across the ocean had brought these back. Explained the technique. Breathe in, then out. Offered him one. He tried it. By the end of the cigarette, he had the look of a man who had found something he'd been looking for his whole life. That particular combination of lightheadedness and warmth he spent his days chasing through wine. I went to the cart and came back with 2 cartons. Told him these were precious items, each carton worth 10 taels of silver, and that I was giving him everything I had as a gift to my father-in-law. He took them with both hands, all previous coldness completely forgotten. Qinglian watched me with a look that said she couldn't figure out what I was doing. I didn't explain. She'd understand eventually. A man with no self-control who already had one costly habit had just been given another one that was significantly harder to quit. And when the cigarettes ran out, he'd know exactly who had more. Li Lauer would be very nice to Qinglian from now on. He just didn't know that yet. The sister-in-law called us in for lunch with a warmth that would have been unrecognizable an hour earlier. She'd made lamb broth with the meat I'd brought. Li Lauer offered me wine immediately. I told him I didn't drink, and he should keep it all for himself. He opened the jar and smelled it before drinking. His expression changed completely. Nothing he'd tasted before came close to this. He said I was a truly filial son-in-law and poured himself a bowl. I watched him drink it and quietly worried I might have miscalculated the dosage. 3 bowls of 52 proof Baijiu disguised as wine, consumed by a man used to the thin local stuff. By the 3rd bowl, he was seeing 2 of everything. He threw his arm around my shoulder and asked how much I'd take for Qinglian. Said he'd sell her to me for 5 taels. I stared at him. Qinglian's face went through several things at once. His daughter-in-law tried to redirect him. He looked at her with unfocused eyes and asked which establishment she worked at. She went red and left the room. Qinglian's mother moved to intervene. Qinglian stopped her gently and looked at me with an expression that said she'd had enough. I told Li Lauer to enjoy his wine and that we'd be heading back now. Outside, Qinglian slipped a silver ingot quietly into her mother's hand and climbed onto the cart. I turned to her mother and told her directly. I was building a house right now, and once it was finished I was coming back to bring her home with us. She started crying and said I had a good heart, but she was fine, and I should just take care of Qinglian and not worry about her. I didn't argue, but I also didn't change my mind. We drove home. On the road, Qinglian asked quietly if I really meant what I'd said about her mother. I told her yes. Her father was not a person worth worrying about, but her mother was, and nobody living in that house was going to have a good life. Having her mother with us cost nothing and gained everything. Qinglian didn't say anything else, but she sat a little closer on the cart. Back in the village, the construction crew had finished for the day and was cooking dinner at the worksite. Master Chong came running over the moment he saw me. He wanted to know more about the electrical materials. Asked whether harnessing electricity would anger the thunder god and lightning goddess. I attributed everything to mystical principles and ancient wisdom. In this era, that was the only explanation that landed cleanly. I noticed him eyeing my cigarette with undisguised envy. I'd started smoking regularly again. The space had plenty, and old habits are old habits. Days passed. Half a month went by. By this point, Master Chong had decided I was a celestial being in human form. Every architectural concept I mentioned ignited something in him. He started showing up at every spare moment to ask questions, following me around until I couldn't get any peace. Eventually, I started going up the mountain every morning at dawn just to escape. One of those mornings, I found a quiet spot near the waterfall pool on the back hill. The villagers called it something colorful involving a cow, and settled in with my air rifle from the space. Perfect for small game. No regulations, no licensing requirements. Just a man, a gun, and the morning quiet. I shot a wild rabbit on the first attempt, collected it, reloaded, and settled back into wait. Nothing else came. I'd probably disturbed everything within earshot walking over to collect the rabbit. I lay back on an inflatable camp mat I'd brought from the space, lit a cigarette, and listened to the waterfall. Clean mountain air. Clear water. No factories, no pollution. The spring here would put anything from my old world to shame. Then I heard footsteps. Someone coming down the trail from the deeper hills, breathing hard under the weight of a large basket. They spotted me lying on what probably looked like a very strange object. Chu Chen, what are you doing up here when you've got a perfectly good home to sit in? I sat up quickly. It was Gu Xiufang, a young widow from the village, around 25 or 26. She'd married into Mashan village from somewhere else, and then 3 or 4 years ago her husband died in an accident while working away from home. She'd been living alone ever since, caring for her elderly mother-in-law who had trouble walking. 2 women alone in the village. They got pushed around constantly. Even Ma Sen had tried his luck with her more than once. She'd never let him get anywhere. I asked what she was doing alone in the hills this deep into winter. She said she was gathering mountain goods to sell. Asked the same of me. I told her honestly. The house construction was too loud. I'd come up to shoot rabbits and get some peace. She took her basket off her back and walked to the edge of the pool. She'd been walking hard enough to work up a sweat despite the cold. She soaked a cloth in the icy water and wiped her face and neck, talking while she did it. She said she couldn't afford to not come out. Bad harvests for several years running. Without enough food stored before winter, it would be a hungry few months. I sat with that for a moment. I remembered from the original Chu Chen's memories that Gu Xiufang had been one of the people who'd helped Qinglian, taking her along to find work, going into the hills together to gather wild vegetables when things were really bad. If you're short on food this winter, I said, just come to Qinglian. We have grain. She laughed a little and said she'd worry about what Qinglian would think, a young widow showing up to borrow food all the time. I told her I wasn't Ma San and she shouldn't worry about that kind of nonsense. She seemed to relax at that. She stopped looking like she was about to leave and came over to where I was sitting. Then she noticed the inflatable camp mat. She sat on it, immediately jumped back up, then very carefully sat down again. What is this thing? It's so soft. I told her it came from across the ocean. She looked at me with an expression that said she'd been underestimating how far I'd come up in the world. Then she asked why I'd brought something like this to the mountains alone, without Qinglian. I caught the implication and started to respond. She got there first. Said she'd heard from Qinglian that I still hadn't properly been a husband to her. Asked if there was something wrong with me. That was a direct challenge, and we both knew it. I looked at her. She looked back with the expression of a woman who had been patient for 3 years and found the whole situation increasingly amusing. We went back and forth like that for a while, her teasing, me deflecting, both of us aware of exactly what the conversation was actually about. She was testing the water. I wasn't going to fall over myself, but I wasn't pretending not to notice either. Eventually I stood up, cigarette in my mouth, and told her it was too cold out here and that next time I'd bring a tent. She laughed, a real laugh, and said she was just having fun with me and I should get home before Qinglian started wondering where I was. She picked up her basket, turned, and headed back down the trail. I watched her go and thought that winter in Mashan village was turning out to be considerably more interesting than I'd expected.